Hello, Something Guys and Gals, this is Something Guy 912. Well, perhaps I was too quick to jump the gun on making my previous analysis of Borderlands 3 something that I could make money on, as apparently you need a certain subscriber count to be approved for monetization in the first place. Nevertheless, the process of that video's acceptance on YouTube was relatively swift, and had no complications uploading it. Furthermore, it was a labor of passion first before it was a venture to make some quick money. It was just I had hoped that I could be reasonably compensated for my efforts for as long as I had worked on it. But I'm deviating a bit here, although the reason I am bringing that tangent up was near the end of my analysis on said game. I had stated that I'd be interested in covering Borderlands 2 as well as the other mainline games in a similar fashion. And despite that I won't be making any money on that previous video, I'm still very much passionately interested in covering Borderlands 2's story, as it's the best of the mainline games. But here's the part where I'm going to disappoint you and state that while Borderlands 2 does have a lot of strong storytelling, with one of the most compelling antagonists to date, Borderlands 2 is not without faults and contrivance, and I'm here to concretely dispel the notion that Borderlands 2's story is airtight. But considering the competition that Borderlands 2 has compared to the story of Borderlands 1 and the pre-sequel, and Borderlands 3, it does certainly stand out as the pinnacle of writing, and the contrivances and conveniences that are present in Borderlands 2 are considerably more forgivable than the ones in Borderlands 3. If you're familiar with my coverage of Borderlands 3's story, again, I will go through Borderlands 2 chapter by chapter, as that also had the benefit of the story being neatly chopped up by chapters that I can organize this video in a similar vein to it. Of course, if it wasn't already clear before, major spoilers for all of the mainline Borderlands titles will be present, in video and through text, and I will also have to retroactively take plot bits from the pre-sequel, as it's the wedge between Borderlands 1 and 2 to give context for some of the characters' motivations in BL2. I believe that as a result of Borderlands 3's story having been written like someone either only knows about the lore of Borderlands for one day, or has contempt for it, has conversely made the perceptions of the story behind the previous titles now suddenly perfect, similarly to how the Star Wars sequel trilogy made the prequels perfect in comparison, when they are only better by not trampling on the legacy of the OT, for instance. Nostalgia is a very seductive smokescreen to cloud the faults of the past while brigading the faults of the now. So with that in mind, I say let's get under the hood of this old gem and find those faults, shall we?
So, you want to hear another story, huh? One where the very fate of Pandora hangs in the balance. If not, too bad, I'm telling you anyway. First, there was the vault, an alien prison opened with a mystical key. To the warriors who opened it, the vault was just a container of tentacles and disappointment. They vanished into the wastelands, certain that the vault held no treasure at all. They were wrong. The vault's opening triggered the growth of iridium, a priceless alien element. Soon, the rare and valuable mineral emerged all across Pandora. Its appearance attracted many, including the Hyperion Corporation. They came to Pandora to mine iridium and bring order to the savage planet. Through their excavations, Hyperion uncovered evidence of an even greater vault. Their leader vowed to find it, to use its power to civilize the Borderlands, once and for all. But Hyperion weren't the only ones searching for the next vault's alien power. The call of danger and loot is not so easily resisted. Certain warriors came to Pandora in droves to uncover its hidden secrets. Some would call them adventurers. Others call them fools. But I call them vault hunters. Our story begins with them, and with a man named Handsome Jack.
As with the beginning of Borderlands 1, Borderlands 2 begins with Marcus's monologue, detailing in short the current summary of the plot and stated goals of our antagonists and protagonists, with the added mention of the results of the thinly veiled plot of Borderlands 1. The first of many major retcons introduced in Borderlands 2 is the founding of Iridium, some kind of valuable alien ore birthed from the fight with the Destroyer that is a cornerstone of our new antagonist's efforts in trying to cleanse Pandora for the greater good. It's a retcon in that Borderlands 1 constantly reminds you that said vault that contains said Destroyer supposedly opens once every 200 years. And given 200 years is a small amount of time considering our own human history, means that this phenomena should have already been found out, shouldn't it? And unfortunately, this is only explained in Borderlands 3 that defeating said Destroyer allowed for said Iridium to crack from the stratosphere, and given that supposedly our new antagonist had anticipated that happening calls into question how literally no one else did. But I'm going a bit far ahead here, as I'll have to bring it up when pertinent, similarly to gaping questions regarding Borderlands 3, but in short, how the Iridium came about in Borderlands 2 isn't explained well enough to infer whether it was by the means of the Destroyer coming about every 200 years, or of it being defeated in the first place. But as far as all other details are concerned, it's quite straightforward in terms of the antagonist's motives and our own. I think it's even clever in a way how the antagonist of the story being told through Marcus isn't necessarily deemed villainous, but just a neutral faction in the race for the next vault. Similarly to Atlas in the bid for the vault in BL1, which is great for foreshadowing for our new antagonist motivations, such that he'll blow Commandant Steele completely out of the fucking water. Anywho, one thing that isn't explained by Marcus but through the intro cutscene is there being a poster of Handsome Jack, supposedly offering to work with would-be vault hunters in finding the vault they are both working for. This subtle poster and the transition into the train line do a good job of building a through line for both our respective vault hunters' motivations, as well as providing a clear idea of how each vault hunter function. Unlike Borderlands 1, where you're just stuck in a fucking train waffling about, and Borderlands 3, where said vault hunters' motivations are up for dispute. We can see clearly that our respective vault hunters have boarded up the train, certain that Handsome Jack is good on his word up until Hyperion personnel start attacking them, and we proceed to see them fight with their unique abilities in a more distinct fashion than before. Afterwards, they presumably board towards the front of the train line, to which they witness a whole barrage of explosives ready for detonation, with Handsome Jack's first line delivered via a crude dummy of himself.
It's cute that y'all think you're the heroes of this little adventure, but you're not.
This particular line is very emblematic throughout the entire arc of this story, as we'll soon find out how Handsome Jack views himself as the hero of this given story, but we'll leave that in my sleeve as there is something that I'm certain would-be defenders of Borderlands 3 would bring up. Why would Handsome Jack deliberately destroy an entire train line to kill roughly 4 to 6 vault hunters? Indeed, that doesn't seem entirely cost efficient given how many millions of dollars and years it took to fashion that train line, only for it to go up in smoke. But there is benefit of the doubt in this scene. One, there was likely a lot more vault hunters who were suckered in that we don't see in the cutscene, likely inside one of the many other carts on the train, and our focus is only on the 4 that we see, and seen as if these 4 were fooled into thinking that Handsome Jack was going to exchange the vault fairly, that likely millions of bandits, who, as I've already stated, are ostensibly vault hunters too, would be as well? Not to mention the destruction of a train line like this, where there's almost no escape, is similar in vein to shooting fish in a barrel, so likely Handsome Jack figured it was worth the risk, if meaning he could cut out on the one competition keeping him from getting to said vault. However, there is an issue with this scene regarding a different motivation for Handsome Jack later on, but again, we'll get to that, rest assured. After that near-death experience, you awake surprisingly alive from it, with Claptrap, only the second worst character in all of Borderlands, elated at your survival. As with Borderlands 1, he's merely there to facilitate currently what's at stake in the current game, and as your mini tutorial for gameplay's sake, as Claptrap not so abruptly mentions that Handsome Jack had cancelled his product line as well as needing you as an excuse to join the Resistance in Sanctuary. Why Handsome Jack pulled the plug beyond making you want to cut your own ears off is better stated later on, but Why Claptrap needs some close-to-death Vault Hunter to help out in his efforts is not, and supposedly Claptrap is aware that Handsome Jack has been busy with cleaning out house on his competition, which makes what I said about Vault Hunters being fooled by his promises less vindicated, but benefit of the doubt again, maybe Claptrap just meant in regards to cleaning out what he deems as bandits. As with Borderlands 1, we are suddenly introduced to Angel again, who assures us that she is here to help and that
you're alive for a reason, and I am here to help you.
said reason will bring this line of dialogue and the intro scene into a spiral of questions regarding, again, the knowledge of certain characters, but we'll get to there, don't worry. Claptrap follows you along into his little hidey hole where he mentions that Handsome Jack dumps most of these would-be opposers to his plan here, including Vault Hunters. Again, I'm really stretching beyond my limits to give this a pass, but maybe only Claptrap is aware that Handsome Jack has been doing this, and this would be resistance too. But even then, if this is something he's been doing for some time, 5 years between the events of BL1 and BL2, then surely some of the Vault Hunters, including you lot, would guess that him sharing the vault with you was a vain pursuit? But enough of plot. Hijinks ensue. Claptrap gets jumped by a bullymong named Knuckledragger, whom rips his eye off, setting in motion our next goal to get it back and to quickly get off this glacier. While Angel assures us again that we need him to get anywhere, and that the original heroes of Borderlands 1s are past their prime. Which again will call into question certain stakes at hand, similarly to some of the stakes in Borderlands 3, but not nearly to the same extreme. The ground shakes around you, which Claptrap quickly exclaims is likely Handsome Jack's drilling operations taking hold as he's nearing his descent into the vault you're looking for. While still rummaging about, Handsome Jack makes his first debut, talking to you condescendingly and with the arrogance of one certain his plan is all in motion. Naysayers about my criticism of Tyrant Calypso's unfounded arrogance will point to Handsome Jack as a counter, but the difference here is that Tyrane's arrogance always came at the cost of willingly giving you information that you could use to defeat her or get the drop on her, whereas Handsome Jack never imparts info unless he's absolutely certain you are going to die anyway from it. Case in point, in his arrogance, Handsome Jack makes an attempt on your life several times over, and more importantly, Handsome Jack is deliberately playing coy here as again, there is a reason why he's not too worried about you surviving that train crash. Anyhow, you confront Knuckledragger and defeat him, retrieving Claptrap's eye. Of course, since you're no mechanic, Claptrap informs you that you need to get to Hammerlock, the first new character to Borderlands, not taking into account Borderlands 3, in Liarsburg to fix his eye. A Hyperion barge blocks your way, and Claptrap, as being a part of the Hyperion line himself, thinks it's easy to break through, much to his disappointment. Angel helps with that, saying that being an artificial intelligence allows her to network to most of everything on the planet. If you've seen the ending to Borderlands 1, that is only half the truth regarding her, although what I find interesting about this line of dialogue is that Angel never referred to herself as an AI in Borderlands 1, but a guardian angel, which I'm not certain if that was a deliberate Freudian slip on the writer's part, or if, given what we know about Angel's true intentions, is only selling herself as an AI this time around to these respective Vault Hunters, rather than some anomaly in your head. Also a bit of a slip is the fact every time she hacks into something, she refers to it as executing phase shift, which, given every single Siren's ability up to this point is something with the prefix phase behind it, should already be a glaring clue as to what she truly is. Then again, I'm not saying that's necessarily a plot horror contrivance, given knowing that beforehand doesn't do anything to change the plot of the story going forward, but it's like the writers weren't confident in the audience's own ability to try to piece together the already dubious connection between her and Handsome Jack. At the Berg, Claptrap quickly establishes the first major boss that you'll be encountering soon, Captain Flint, who is supposed to have no relation to Baron Flint and Zane Flint until further retcons down the line sunk that ship, as Handsome Jack puts a bounty on your head, while also establishing one of your first major allies, Roland, the leader of the Crimson Raiders from the first Borderlands. This is one thing that always goes unnoticed in regards to praise about Borderlands 2, but remember how I said in the Borderlands 3 vid that the Borderlands games have trouble establishing the disposition of people to the player character? Like how the bandits are immediately hostile to you without any reason as to why? Well, because Handsome Jack just so publicly put a tempting offer on you not only establishes the conflict between Captain Flint's gang and you, but also establishes why the various bandits of Pandora in this context would be hostile towards you. Of course, despite the praise I may be giving in regards to this exchange, this also comes at a cost of conflicting with Handsome Jack's particular demeanor in regards to how he perceives bandit kind. But we'll get to that, don't worry. Anyhow, as Captain Flint is eager to gain that bounty, you have to fight through his men both to save your hide and the hide of Hammerlock. Aghast at your small victory, Captain Flint exasperates that you haven't seen the last of him yet, while Hammerlock figures he can repay your bravery with fixing Claptrap's eye. There's an exchange between him and Hammerlock that kind of reminds me of a disgruntled man with an annoying child who idolizes him, for better or worse, an exchange of which that was silently dropped from Borderlands 3 like many other character moments. Hammerlock, like with Lorelei, doesn't serve as much of the plot rather than amusing side quests regarding hunting exotic wildlife, is not as forgettable as a result of what I already mentioned prior, that the stakes regarding the story are all nestled in Pandora and not the entire universe, where the moment you leave Promethea is the moment Lorelei escapes your memory, Hammerlock does not. It probably also helps that Hammerlock is expertly voiced by J. Michael Tatum, which gives him an iconic presence, and that said stakes in Borderlands 3 are constantly fluid, whereas the stakes of Borderlands 2 are much more straightforward. After the electrical fence is released and Claptrap repaired, Hammerlock mentions that the Crimson Raiders could use someone like you to defeat Handsome Jack, giving your close shave with him and Captain Flint's bandits. It goes without overstating again that unlike Borderlands 3, where our respective Vault Hunters seem to only root for the Crimson Raiders for the fuck of it rather than having a legitimate slight against said antagonists, these Vault Hunters would have no reason not to enlist in the Crimson Raiders to get back at what Handsome Jack did to him. In fact, the notion of betrayal and how many people Handsome Jack fucked over is very thematic throughout the story of Borderlands 2, as everyone who does take umbrage with Handsome Jack have their own reasons for doing so, unlike the stereotypical notion of siding with the good guys because the bad guys say they are the bad guys, the likes of the Calypsos in Borderlands 3. This is a similar fault with Borderlands 1, although at least there you can pragmatically argue that the Vault Hunters are opportunistic enough in not wanting to share the wealth of Atlas, but the respective antagonists merely came completely out of left field almost halfway through the game's story. Although, that doesn't go without saying that Borderlands 2 does have some faults, like Hammerlock not so abruptly mentioning how Handsome Jack is two-faced, literally, in his disposition to cleanse Pandora and then cutting himself short on how he's spouting exposition, not forgiving the fact that the exposition was still delivered. Again, take note, writers, just because you point out a fault in your story writing doesn't forgive you pointing it in to begin with. I'd honestly say that trying to be that meta about it just makes it more cringy than just letting the bad story writing be if you really need to get that point across. Then again, Borderlands 2 has a lot more forced humor sprinkled in and constantly makes fun of itself, as well as aspects of Borderlands 1 that Borderlands 3 thought to turn up to 11 while also dissing the half-decent writing, but we'll go into that one more permanent. Anyhow, next chapter, aho! And why not start Chapter 3 with one of my many deviations off from the main story, as there is a small but important side mission that you can pick up by happenstance in a locker that begins the Handsome Jack here side mission, which regards the fate of Helena Pierce and of New Haven, now of Handsome Jack running the show. The reason I want to point out this mission in particular is again to get at the coattails of Borderlands 3 and one of the major gripes I had with it, that characters from the previous installment had no closure or involvement in the events of said game. Like with Dr. Ned, who I guess was just quietly axed off save for his vending machines, Axton and Salvador, who only got to reprise their roles in a DLC proto-battle royale mode that doesn't clear up their noticeable absence from the main game, Athena, Janie Springs, Fiona, Sasha, Gordy's, and August, all characters from Tales from the Borderlands who were treated with the forget-me stick, considering BL3 seemed to want to conveniently forget all of Tales save for Reese and Vaughn. In this context, we get some closure on an otherwise minor character in the original Borderlands who was serving as lieutenant of the Crimson Raiders who got intercepted by Handsome Jack and his muscle, Wilhelm. More importantly, unlike Maya's presence in Borderlands 3, where her being at Athenas completely befuddles the circumstances of acquiring the Promethean Vault Key, because Helena Pierce's role in Borderlands 2 is relegated to something not plot significant, she can't do damage to the story either as a result, which was a reasonable compromise I wanted Borderlands 3 to make if they sincerely could not include the laundry list of characters I just mentioned in the game convincingly. Furthermore, Borderlands 2 didn't even have to do this, but it seems the writers in this instance were more considerate about the through line of characters and events, as if characters that are well written involve themselves in the world that ties closely to their character. Without BL3 to remind me of small things like this that we often neglect as needless backstory, this side quest would just be a write-off for some quick XP given finding the audio logs are relatively easy and in close proximity of Liarsburg. But now, I see the value of giving characters who won't be present some amount of consideration. Now we can get back on track to the main story. So after convening with Hammerlock, you go grab Claptrap, to which he provides some additional context as to why he was digging up corpses at Windshield Race to begin with if his intention was to leave for Sanctuary. Apparently, him and Flint made an agreement, that of which Flint double-crossed countless times over, that Claptrap give him any weapons that were left on their person as a result of Handsome Jack's offing of them. How long exactly this exchange has been going on is unknown, as the 5-year gap would mean that there couldn't be any way no one caught on to the idea that Handsome Jack is not too keen on being friendly, which keeps chipping away at the circumstances of the intro cutscene, even if said cutscene still gives our respective heroes a motivation to get back at him. Needless to say, at least that does explain why you having survived Handsome Jack's folly was the catalyst for Claptrap to stop digging up corpses, as now he can get back at Captain Flint with you to fend him off. And so you proceed to head on over to Boom Boom's lair to do just that, but not without what I alluded to earlier regarding the forced humor of this story, as Handsome Jack rears his head in to complain about pretzels, as well as boast about owning a diamond pony he names Butt Stallion in honor of you. On top of that, Claptrap sarcastically remorses at the bandits that you are killing, sort of a omen regarding how superficial NPCs reacting to you killing NPCs are in future video games, TLO 2, but clearly meant to contrast with Claptrap's glee of you killing them. The resulting forced humor of Borderlands 3 is most definitely a fault of Borderlands 2, as the most humor you got out of Borderlands 1 seemed to be only included once the DLC reared in, with Armory of General Knox being the most influential in terms of the direction Borderlands 2 would fall to. Although that doesn't forgive Borderlands 3 for having the humor be as dated as Borderlands 2's, as Borderlands 2 came out over 9 years ago and Borderlands 3 being just barely a year old now. Borderlands 2 is more self-deferential in regards to the nature of the game being cel-shaded and thus resembling a comic book as a result. Still, at least Borderlands 2 doesn't cut away at its more emotionally biting moments to force in a joke unlike Borderlands 3, but I think you all know already at this point my distaste for many of the aspects regarding Borderlands 3. The sequence leading up to fighting your first boss, Boom Boom, I feel is a bit more fleshed out than the Shiv fight in Borderlands 3, although that's more of a result of the mechanics of the fight rather than the story itself, as it allows you to use grenades, shields, and action skill, assuming you don't go straight for the main story and do some of the other side quests wherein. The circumstances after the boss fight, however, are a bit more contrived, as Claptrap has you use the giant naval missile Boom Boom were using to open the door, which accidentally launches Claptrap right into Captain Flint's territory. Hell, if you wait for several minutes, Claptrap subtly nods at the off chance of you firing that while he's close to the door, one of several fourth wall breaks that the characters make if you don't do a certain thing within a given time, which again is a deference to how the writing is trying too hard to be funny. Nevertheless, at least you don't have to deal with the glorified escort mission, as it results you just going through a gauntlet of Captain Flint's enemies in the process. You save Claptrap from getting beat up by some of Flint's bandits as you both proceed to elevate closer to Captain Flint's domain by your own means, as it's often overstated that Claptrap can't climb stairs before you both proceed to fight him through a barrage of flame traps scattered across. Once defeated, you and Claptrap make it to his ship, which is never clearly stated how or when Claptrap got the ship, or why he even needed one in the first place, but nevertheless your only means to sanctuary. Neither is it really explained if Claptrap or you even know how to use his ship, or whether the ship is still functional, or why Captain Flint's men never used it. I feel like I'm being reminded of aspects of Borderlands 3 that were never explained at all that well. Oh well, I'm sure that won't come up again, will it? After making the perilous trip to the general area known as Three Horns Divide, Claptrap stays behind with the ship while you make your way to Sanctuary, for reasons. More roadblocks, literal and metaphorical, slow your approach to doing so as you bear witness to a clash between a Crimson Raider and some bandits in the process, destroying the bridge above you. Because of that, you need a vehicle from Scooter's catch-a-ride stations, but of course that also comes with complications, as Scooter won't allow any random nobody, including bandits, to take one of his rides. Angel suggests in what should be the most subtle nudge to her affair with Handsome Jack as she notices an unmanned Hyperion device nearby you can retrieve in order for her to hack the machine. Another slight retcon regarding Angel is that she will correct herself whenever she curses, which was something she never seemed to do in Borderlands 1 unless I'm mistaken. She never cursed once in that game, which is also a subtle allusion to her involvement with Handsome Jack. Of course, I'm not saying that the Crimson Raiders, or even the original 4 Vault Hunters, would be suspicious of this given they don't know if she even is contacting you, but wouldn't you, as being the 4 Vault Hunters who just narrowly escaped death from the CEO of Hyperion himself, should? The only benefit of the doubt I can give in this moment is that maybe Angel can hack into anything with a signal, be they brand specific or not, and that's the credence the Vault Hunters are giving her. Still, this is yet another example of the writers not being entirely confident in the audience being able to make that connection. In any case, you retrieve the device and use it to have Angel help you get your car. Through that, you go through the ascent upwards to the gates of Sanctuary while Handsome Jack continues to belittle you for your bandit ways, which runs mostly concurrent with his state of mind on things. I think the important distinction between how Handsome Jack belittles you compared to Tyreen is that Handsome Jack always does it with the notion believing himself to be the hero of his given story, alluded to earlier by the line during the intro cutscene, whereas Tyreen has no pretense of wanting to be the hero like the Saturday morning cartoon villain she is. This might also be down to personal opinion, but I also like Handsome Jack's voice, particularly in the way he makes you love to hate him, whereas Tyreen has this annoying, piercing voice that sounds like a mix between Mickey Mouse and a Valley Girl, which doesn't help captivate me to said characters. At the gate, you activate the intercom to which Lieutenant Davis responds, immediately admonishing the would-be bandits banging at the gates until he realizes it's a Vault Hunter. I shouldn't have to repeat myself from when I criticized this in Borderlands 3, but the distinction of what makes one a Vault Hunter has always been extremely vague, in that if the bandits were clever, could sell themselves off as a Vault Hunter to get the good graces of any morally good person until stabbing them in the back when opportune. Nevertheless, David forwards communication to Roland, who is delighted to hear about your current exploits across the wasteland, which apparently word travels fast considering your only known deeds were shutting down Flint and clearing Liarsburg. He says that he'll let you in once you search and rescue Corporal Reese, the aforementioned Crimson Raider, duking it out with the bandits, who is supposed to bring them a power core to keep their shields running. We'll get into a bit of detail as to why they do, as there is another bit of a contrivance regarding how Handsome Jack is putting pressure on the Crimson Raiders later on, but for now, we'll just tuck that in my sleeve. You look for clues regarding Corporal Reese's fate, leading up to him being at death's door with bandits surrounding him. You clear the bandits out as Reese warns you that the power core was stolen from him by the Bloodshots, one of the only fleshed out bandit clans depicted across all of the Borderlands titles. More about them as we go on, but of course Reese dies, much to Roland's chagrin. He wants you to go kill some bandits to avenge Reese while you're out looking for that core, which serves as a new quest mechanic introduced in Borderlands 2 regarding doing optional objectives on top of doing the mission itself, as well as radial waypoints, where what you're looking for is not clearly defined or not pinpoint. I think this serves as a nice way to both add some quality of life improvements to some of the issues regarding Borderlands 1's mission objectives, as well as a through line of what has transpired for the last 5 years for Roland, as well as the remnants of the Crimson Lance. Once retrieving the power core, Roland tells you he'll meet you once he gets there, which he would if a sudden kidnapping of Roland didn't thwart that plan. Hurrying on back, Handsome Jack again tries to bargain your surrender to him on the promise of a quick death, as well as peace on Pandora, while also giving hints as to a secret up his sleeve regarding the joy he'll get from you being wiped off this earth. And if my spoon feeding of what that secret details up to this point haven't gone through to you, then I guess Zero being a turncoat in Borderlands 3 also came as a surprise. Once to the intercom, Davis quickly guides you into Sanctuary, considering the uncertain fate of Roland as well as the weakening of the shield's core. Once replaced, you can witness Helios, the satellite overbearing on Pandora, cast down moonshots which get deflected easily by the power core you just retrieved. Now, regarding the structure of Sanctuary, notice how the only point of entry in and out of Sanctuary is just one giant bridge across. I can assume that Handsome Jack is launching moonshots down from Helios in order to put pressure on the denizens to either give up, surrender, or churn in would-be traitors to Jack's plan. That's all fine and dandy, but what about setting up a blockade to flush out people who would bring in supplies as well as new recruits at the very gate Davis is keeping people out? You could just as easily, maybe even more effectively, pressure Sanctuary into succumbing to Jack's will, given you would be starving the denizens of food and morale in the process, rather than blissfully shooting down on them with reckless abandon. Or better yet, do both so that they know that even if you do find a means to get food outside of moving out of Sanctuary, that you still have complete annihilation knocking on their door. Given that Handsome Jack is the CEO of a particularly large company, one large enough to fashion a satellite egotistic of his namesake, that he should be able to expend the resources needed to set up a blockade large enough for not one Crimson Raider, Bandit, nor Skag could get through? Then again, this is completely down to the way that Sanctuary is designed itself, and that maybe in other iterations of the location may very well show other entry and exit points that making a blockade would be a useless affront. But surely just taking pot shots from Elpis isn't exactly the most convincing way for the Crimson Raiders to throw the towel in? But nevertheless, what is the plan now to take down Jack? Seeing as Roland's Echo communicator went dead, David needs your help to figure the whereabouts of him, since apparently he's too busy guarding the power core to do so himself. Including the rest of the residents of Sanctuary, strangely enough, although this is slightly alleviated by Jessup mentioning that Roland was on some kind of reconnaissance mission, although that also sort of contradicts what Roland said about me and you specifically at Sanctuary, assuming he would make it back at the same time you got that replacement power core in tow. Angel comes to accidentally swear and remark again as to why you're important to helping the Crimson Raiders, as well as to what Sanctuary actually is, which in essence is going to be your main hub like the Sanctuary 3 in Borderlands 3, and Firestone/New Haven in Borderlands 1. As I mentioned briefly in regarding Borderlands 3's story, the way you're introduced to said hub world is a bit clunky, as you have to do a bunch of busy work just to get intel on Roland's disappearance, while a vomit of exclamation marks also puke your screen in the process. Of course, this is all in service of allowing the return of characters from Borderlands 1, like Scooter, Marcus, Mad Moxie, and Dr. Zed, to name a few. As for the ones who don't return, again, like with Helena Pierce's untimely death, we'll get clarification on them too. As for what that busy work entails, according to Scooter, if Roland were to ever wound up missing that he was to initiate Plan B, which in short means to power up the city in such a way as to make it fly, as Angel already previously alluded to Sanctuary being a abandoned doll ship. This is also a neat segue into addressing the new currency involving Iridium, as you trade that with Crazy Earl to get a fuel cell for the ignition primers to get Sanctuary flying. Of course, that doesn't quite work, so Scooter has you go look in Roland's HQ to find clues. Why exactly no one else did is beyond me, as the door is wide open and that would likely be the first place you would look to find him, but it gets even more confusing as once in, there's apparently an echo recording that Roland left for you regarding his whereabouts. So that means that Roland had left for his reconnaissance mission sometime while you were out literally getting the power core, and then got captured soon after, despite telling you he would meet you at Sanctuary. But if he got captured while in Sanctuary, that leaves even more questions, seeing as I already mentioned how Sanctuary only has one entry point, and that Davis was keeping close vigil of who was coming in and out, right? Roland's capture in this instance, I feel, is most definitely contrived in order to set up the next plot threads concerning another returning character you played as in Borderlands 1, seeing as the circumstances of how don't really make any sense regarding the frame of time when he did, as well as the architecture of Sanctuary itself. But maybe it'll all clear itself up once we've figured out who he was staking out. Inside Roland's safe is yet another echo transmitter of an unknown figure named the Firehawk, who says,
"This is the Firehawk. Come to Frostburn Canyon or people will die."
Immediately, Scooter is afraid of the implications of this stranger, despite the fact that Roland specifically said that he left a echo recorder regarding said whereabouts, meaning that in some degree, Roland and the Firehawk have some kind of affair between each other. And we'll get to what said affair implies, as Scooter not knowing who the Firehawk is, including the rest of the residents of Sanctuary, brings up more issues with the story. I know that up to this point I've been mainly regarding the story as such while gaining every chance I can to poke daggers at Borderlands 3, but believe me, around the midway point of the story is when things start to fall apart context-wise. So based on the information gathered, you quickly head on over to Frostburn Canyon in the hopes of saving Roland from this so-to-speak Firehawk. The Bloodshots make a slight return as they appear to be making a blitzkrieg on the Firehawk's lair, strangely enough. Flanksteak, the leader of the Bloodshots, has some sort of personal beef with the Firehawk that he doesn't want you to interfere on, which seems to be more exasperated considering Angel's surprise at their sudden confidence in fetching him. Still, you and surprisingly handsome Jack are both convinced that Roland is indeed captured by the Firehawk, which once we figure out who that is will bring up more questions regarding the knowledge of our antagonist, so to speak. But I can't spill that secret handsome Jack is keeping up his sleeve yet, so we'll wait to address it until then. Through the obtrusively placed traps that the Firehawk laid out, you finally make it to his lair, where said Firehawk is duking it out with some bandits. Once close, you find that the Firehawk is none other than Lilith, another returning playable character from Borderlands 1. She says that she has worked with the Raiders and pulled the Firehawk's stunt as a diversion for the bandits, so that the Raiders can divest all their interests towards Jack. Also of note is that Lilith seems to have exhausted herself beyond her means after her little bout, which also brings about the second major retcon of Borderlands 2, Siren's dependency on Iridium. Apparently, after the rise of Iridium, Lilith had been taking heaps of it to enhance her powers, such to the extent that she gets burned out very quickly afterwards, sort of like a crack whore like I mentioned prior. This is both put in place to establish the connection between Sirens and the Vault, as well as an arc involving Lilith's increasing dependency on Iridium and concern from her friends in doing so, despite her best intentions. Too bad Borderlands 3 decided that aspect was to be forgot, unless convenient like with Tannis' inability to free herself from an easy captive, so you can waste time on an obvious diversion from the Calypsos. Whoops, was I talking about Borderlands 3's problems more than Borderlands 2's again? Forgive me. So, if what Lilith is saying is true, how the fuck was Scooter or the rest of the residents of Sanctuary not in the know of this exchange she was making with Roland? Shouldn't have Scooter been elated that the Firehawk was asking you to head on over if he did know that affair was going on? It's like they wanted to have a bait and switch on par with Zero turning sides to Maliwan, where it wouldn't make sense given what we know of the characters and how it requires characters to be not told about things. Now, maybe there is benefit in the doubt on the idea that only Roland and Lilith knew of this exchange and no one else, perhaps on the off chance one of the residents was keen on spilling that to the bandits or Hyperion even, but seeing as Lilith specifically states that the exchange she made with the Raiders puts that benefit to death. So suffice it to say, this is a lazy bait and switch. More problematic is that apparently Roland was here with Lilith before being captured by the Bloodshots, who got cocky and trying to get her too as a result, which means Roland couldn't have come back to see you in Sanctuary by the time you came back with the power core, nor would he have been able to provide 2 echo recordings, one of which he had to get a recording of Lilith's Firehawk voice in Frostburn Canyon, in anticipation of his capture or of your arrival. Or, get this, maybe like with the Calypsos, Roland could read the script and had made those because he knew he was going to get captured in some contrived way. Honestly, everything involving the means of Roland's initial capture is extremely troubling, given there isn't a real time or place for him to have done so, while being able to facilitate the means of which to rescue him if he was captured in the manner Lilith said he was. As I said, Borderlands 2 has its own writing problems, but it ain't over yet, because how Lilith managed to keep her Firehawk stun a secret that even handsome Jack doesn't know will come barreling forth the blooded issues with the story. So a second onslaught of bloodshot bandits raids the lair, to which you and Lilith fight together. Afterwards, again, Lilith is feeling the need for her rocks, so of course you give her another chunk, if the analogy of her being a crack whore wasn't already written on its face. Soon after, she tells you that Roland was trying to get intel on what Jack plans to do with the vault, as well as its whereabouts before getting captured. She attempts to teleport you, another new mechanic of hers not previously established in Borderlands 1, although I give this a pass considering how amped up she's getting from Iridium, to the stronghold, only managing to poop you 10 meters away from her. Nevertheless, you'll have to soldier on there on foot while she proceeds to go back to Sanctuary to keep it in wraps. This is also a bit of foreshadowing, as she'll proceed to teleport you to much greater distances the more Iridium she keeps chowing down on. But more on that as we go on. For now, the next chapter rears its head. Making your way to the bloodshot ramparts, Lilith informs you you'll need a vehicle to bar access through the main gate leading into the dilapidated dam. Unfortunately, what vehicle exactly is uncertain, as you can't get access easily without one of the bandit technicals. Scooter lets you know that his sister Ellie can help you find the means to acquire one out in the dust, which for story's sake is apparently hours away from Three Horns, but in gameplay terms is a simple warp like the other locations. Also curious of note is that the dust is also in close proximity to some of the other locations that are almost right next door to Three Horns, which makes the geography of the dust conspicuous in nature if it's apparently way out the vicinity. Nevertheless, you make it to Ellie's garage, and Ellie, the second new character introduced in Borderlands 2, is both related to Scooter and Mad Moxie as a sort of middle ground between the two, which also sort of ties into the estranged relationship Ellie has between Mad Moxie, given her desire to be more like Scooter than her in terms of mannerisms. As for plot goes, she doesn't serve much significance beyond stating that you need to go shoot up a few bandit patrols to deck out the schematics of a bandit technical she has in order to gain access to the ramparts. But Ellie does strike the balance of one not particularly bothered with the otherwise crude comments she would get about her body. In fact, she seems to embrace the attempts of the bandits to mock her figure as a backhanded compliment, which contrasts with Moxie in the latter parts of the pre-sequel and Borderlands 3 notwithstanding. Why I bring any of this up is because Ellie had much more significance as the engineering master behind the Sanctuary 3 and of the capture right stations after Scooter's sacrifice in Tales from the Borderlands, and as a result had to trim down the dynamic of her being a wedge against Moxie's refined status and Scooter's hillbilly countenance, leading me to believe Scooter's death was in service of giving Ellie more screen time than him, since Scooter is more entertaining as a character than her, even if she is likable in some regard. Because none such dynamic exists in Borderlands 3, and despite being related by blood, literally never meet face to face within the vicinity of the ship. Christ, I keep wanting this to be a critique of Borderlands 2, but every time I keep getting reminded of faults of Borderlands 3 time and time again. Okay, back on track, literally and metaphorically. You get all the bandit parts you need, and Ellie suits you up with a bandit technical, which serves as a co-op improvement to the Outrunner as it can sit 4 people rather than 2, although I feel it's much better in almost every regard as it handles a lot smoother than it, and its mounted saw blades are easier to aim with. Gameplay shenanigans aside, you make it back to the main gate and do the same song and dance with the Outrunner, which works to your surprise, despite Flank Steak already starting to get wise to the idea of someone trying to steal his hostage. I guess bandits don't care about who is driving the vehicle so long as the vehicle matches what they drive, but they could clearly see who's driving said vehicle, could they not? Again, this is a similar issue with a similar scene in Borderlands 3 where getting access to Carnivoro is quite easy despite the prerequisites. Once the gate opens, you ambush the bandits before the gates can reclose, which also triggers the opening of a second inner gate for the mini-boss Bad Maw to try to stop your ambush. So, If Flanksteak isn't interested in having you take Roland from him, wouldn't he just close this inner gate as soon as Badmaw got out? Why would he keep it open after you kill Badmaw and the rest of the goons at the main gate? But what's even worse than that is that apparently the gate does reclose after Badmaw exited from it, but also Badmaw had the key that could open said inner drawbridge from the other side? Why would Badmaw have the only means for you to get inside the dam if he was going to risk getting killed in the process of stopping you? I guess you could try to use the arrogance argument given the nature of bandits, but goddamn, Flanksteak isn't really thinking ahead here given he was able to mount up a pretty successful and easy capture of Roland, yet can't keep yokels like you from getting past gates apparently. Throughout the trek through the ramparts, you hear Flanksteak attempt to negotiate a deal with Hyperion with no feedback coming from the other end, which wounds up to be a sort of amusing sort of events where Flanksteak proceeds to lower the asking amount for Roland farther and farther until it's a pitiful amount. Lilith foreshadows this, as well as Hyperion going dead on Flanksteak's end, that likely Hyperion are just going to take Roland forcibly from the Bloodshots regardless of Handsome Jack's deal from earlier. Which you might expect me to call dumb on Handsome Jack's part, but I think this falls in line perfectly to his mentality on bandit kind in the first place, that he would sucker them into a deal that he won't make good on his end. I mean, the fact that Handsome Jack tries to bargain your sympathy on what he's out to do with Pandora, considering you're killing a bunch of opportunistic psychos in a dredged up dam, it makes perfect sense that he wouldn't want to negotiate with the very people he's trying to be rid of. However, there is a bit of an issue in regards to how Handsome Jack would like to go about capturing Roland for himself, but we'll get to that pretty soon. You make it to where Roland is being held up as he proceeds to fend himself off from a few of the loader bots before being easily captured by the Warden, which seems to be nothing more than a slightly modified version of the constructor bots you'll be coming across more frequently, as well as the loader bots, which are Hyperion's and Handsome Jack's standing army, which is a bit of a contradiction given the Hyperion soldiers presented in the Claptrap Revolution DLC of Borderlands 1. But considering a lot of things regarding the DLC are treated as strictly non-canon, we can just assume that this is the way that Handsome Jack goes about mounting a force. And boy, having automatons that are basically programmed to follow your every beat and measure is not only a much more believable army to have in a bunch of raving psychos, but certainly more effective than it. Of course, there are human personnel that dot a bit of the landscapes regarding Hyperion tech, which will inevitably get people here asking, why would the Hyperion personnel be devoted to Handsome Jack's goal compared to the bandits and to Tyreen? Well, let me tell you. First off, the personnel are being paid to work for Hyperion, so they are quite literally on Handsome Jack's payroll, so it's not merely just dedication more than an obligation to do his bidding. And secondly, given that the loader bots aren't necessarily commanded by the personnel rather than monitored, I think it's safe to say that Handsome Jack at will could use the loader bots to subjugate any defective personnel permanently or temporarily. The fact that the majority of Handsome Jack's army is automated actually helps to strengthen the motivations for them fighting you to begin with, as their motivations are simply whatever Handsome Jack programs them to be. Whereas with Tyreen, whatever sophistry she tries to spin on the bandits doesn't directly correlate to what the bandits give to her other than the aforementioned food supply. Whereas the loader bots being completely subservient to Handsome Jack means that he gets a standing army at the ready to mobilize without the need to eat, sleep, or even feel pain for that matter. Remember, an army marches on its stomach, so unless Tyreen in some way is also providing the bandits means to even fight to begin with, no amount of procuring the faith is going to lend them the vigor to fight in her honor. Anyhow, the goose chase keeps going on as you now have to save Roland from the Warden before it goes somewhere. Apparently, if you don't save Roland, you just have to save him from a location out in the dust called Friendship Gulag, which seems extremely counterintuitive to whatever Handsome Jack intended to do with Roland if he was in his clutches personally, if he was just going to send him to another location close by. Like, why not at Helios, or even the bunker in Thousand Cuts? But I suppose that would get in the way of us knowing what Jack intends to do with the opening of this new vault. But like with the contrivances of Borderlands 3, you can't have something stupid happen in order to allow our respective heroes even a chance at victory. On through the top of the dam, we get one last transmission of Flanksteak, who finally gets a callback from Hyperion, but much to his dismay, they aren't interested. Needless to say, he gets killed in the process, which summarily ends the arc regarding the Bloodshots as a bandit faction. There are more bandit factions introduced later on, but they don't really get as much depth as the Bloodshots do, nor do they even get the pleasure of having unique skins and attire as them. It's kind of a shame, because I really thought there would be more to trying to flesh out the bandit factions on top of fleshing out the weapon manufacturers, but ultimately this just seems like window dressing to completely distract you from the fact that Roland's capture and recapture are both contrived. You make it to where the warden is, patiently awaiting a drop barge. Again, I never failed to kill it in time, so I wouldn't even know if there was one. To which you fend off a barrage of loader bots, both being shot down by Helios, as well as constructed by the warden, as the namesake goes. You defeat the warden and have Roland help you fend off the last reinforcements in their wake. Afterwards, Roland says to meet you at Sanctuary before he lets you in on the scoop regarding his plan to take down Jack, while Angel is thankful that Jack didn't send Wilhelm in, whoever he is to you. And we'll get to him in a moment, as to all other things, seeing as there is 2 other characters we've yet to get acquainted with from Borderlands 1. If it wasn't already enough of you for me to go into surreptitious detail why Roland's initial capture is dumb, get this. Lilith asks Roland after he gets back to Sanctuary how he got captured so easily, to which Roland presumably says he was taking a piss before. So, not only was Roland calling you expecting you to arrive at a place he wasn't at, nor could be given the Bloodshot's anger, but also was doing so while he was literally taking a piss. Furthermore, doing so completely under Lilith's watchful eye, considering the bounty on his head, and within earshot of Bloodshots to capture him. Is there any other reason I should go on as to why his capture is completely contrived from start to finish? Segueing from that nonsense, there is something I do want to belabor a bit regarding the change of character of these 2 respective people from Borderlands 1 to 2. To start, we get to see that Roland is a bit more stoic and a bit awkward with conversation, contrasted to Roland's almost boisterous attitude in Borderlands 1. Although that's the most I can glean from roughly 20 lines of dialogue at best. Similarly, Lilith is arrogant and headstrong, an ethos of hers that could have been better utilized dealing with the literal heel that is Ava in Borderlands 3, but I digress. Both of these characters have gone through a makeover from their almost flat personalities in the previous game. In fact, Roland doesn't even sound like his BL1 counterpart, which you could say is on account of the voice actor changing, but Mordecai, a returning character we'll get introduced to soon, had different actors yet doesn't go through the same change of tone. So why the change exactly? Well, my only guess is that with Roland being the impromptu leader of a group destined to take down Handsome Jack, I can only assume with that caused him to change his personality into someone more catered to leadership than the ex-Crimson Lance Hopper he was in BL1. Secondly, it could be that with Roland and Lilith serving as the secondary main protagonists to the player character, it was pertinent to give them clashing personalities that play into the narrative being told, as well as give them more complexity compared to Borderlands 1, which I think is a reasonable compromise to how drastically different these 2 are, given how fleshed out they've become. Fleshing out the story aside, Roland says that for years the Crimson Raiders have been at an uphill battle with Handsome Jack, and seeing as you lucked out facing against him, metaphorically speaking I'm sure, starts to spill info on what Jack intends to do with the vault he's been digging up lately. Through intel from a Hyperion convoy Roland stole, he says that the vault contains a warrior that once awakened can be controlled at will by whoever opened it, which presumably Jack will use to scour, so to speak, bandits off the face of Pandora. Roland surmises that if they manage to get their hands on the vault key first, they can use the warrior against Hyperion, but seeing as Jack already has the key, we'll go into a bit as to how, considering the events of Borderlands 1, and it being charged necessitates the means of which to do so. Roland wants you to contact his spy out in Tundra Express, who likely has an idea of where that key is being held. The third major retcon that is quickly passed off is that now the key can be charged with Iridium in order to expedite the process of opening vaults, as we are still going off the knowledge of vaults only being able to open once every 200 years by Borderlands 1, and not the additional attempts to fill potholes with Borderlands 3, so that allows Jack to be able to get another vault open in a relatively short amount of time, rather than literally having to drink the blood of children to wait for such a lengthy time. Is it a retcon that does damage to the already thinly veiled plot of Borderlands 1? No, but there is a plot element described regarding the pre-sequel that will bring a lot more questions to Jack's unfound knowledge of the vaults and their workings very soon, at least next chapter soon, I promise. Don't worry, there's a whole can of worms regarding that secret that will have you spinning in fucking circles. Out in the Tundra Express, Roland explains that in order to signal your spy, you'll have to wake him up on account of his ailing sobriety. In order to do this, you have to set alight 3 Varkids with either a fire gun or the conveniently placed fire traps in Flora that dot Tundra Express. Once done, you find that the spy is none other than Mordecai, who is working off a hangover from raiding the convoy that I assume gave Roland the deets on what kind of vault Jack plans on opening. Mordecai tells you that the key is held away by a Hyperion train on the move somewhere, presumably the very vault that Jack intends to open. At least that's the fairest assumption, but given what we found out about how Jack got the key will make that knowledge confusing, although consistently so. I can't explain just yet, just trust me. Roland says that he has a friend named Tiny Tina who can help you hijack, or in this case, derail the train entirely in order to achieve your goal. As for Mordecai's involvement in the story, he doesn't really get much at the start here, as he's merely moseying on about, tagging enemies with slag as you proceed across, but you can immediately tell that Mordecai is going to be treated as the tertiary character, shadowed over Lilith and Roland with his laid back and drunken stupor. It's probably no surprise then that in later DLC and of Borderlands 3 that Mordecai and Brick are treated like the comedic relief side characters and summarily sidelined into what is known as the B team. But even so, that's no excuse not to have them at least care to some regard about the goings-on in Borderlands 3. I'm derailing here again, how poetically ironic. Anyhow, you make it to Tiny Tina's domain, to which your surprise is introduced to thus far the youngest and by far the craziest new character ever introduced in the Borderlands series. She's only 13, by the events of this story, and is the dedicated explosions expert, which is of no surprise given her explosive personality. Now, far be it of me to fall into hypocrisy when I consider Claptrap and Ava to be extremely annoying characters, and Tiny Tina is no exception. However, when it comes to Tiny Tina, there is enough backstory involving some of her side quests that would inform the mannerisms of her character, that I normally forgive moments where she is just making noise for the fuck of it.
Running over here. Run.
It also makes her especially tragic given that the reason she acts as she does is a sort of smokescreen against how she's really feeling deep inside, especially vindicated in the DLC Tiny Tina's assault on Dragon Keep. Whereas with Claptrap or Ava, there isn't any good reason Claptrap acts like a dumbass except to further pad the plot along, or Ava to be an absolute show to everyone on the ship even if she had a rough upbringing. More importantly, seeing as Tiny Tina is 13, she doesn't get herself involved in shit that would risk her own life unless she's around those older than her who could protect her, like Brick or Mordecai for instance, because whether or not she is able to fend for herself doesn't justify putting her in the front lines. That does unfortunately make her involvement in the main narrative of Borderlands 2 only circumstantial involving Tundra Express. But again, considering that she resides in the very place where the stakes are laying, and considering her upbringing is a direct result of Handsome Jack's doing, which is foundational to why those who side against him do so to begin with, is serviceable enough that she doesn't have to take hold of the main story. And take hold we do, as Tiny Tina states that you need to collect some of her badonkadonks, which is shorthand for her missile payloads, in order to bring the train aground. You take them back from the bandits who stole them, and she proceeds to tweak them with her personal flavor. Once done, it's off to set them at the staging area to derail the train, to which Tiny Tina breaks patience and does so prematurely, which careens the entire train and its cargo right off. You fight through the wreckage of the damaged loader bots to make it to one of the train cars, which so happens to contain Wilhelm, Handsome Jack's muscle, who has been alluded to as one to be feared. Even Roland and Lilith panic and demand that you leave, assuming that it was a trap to kill you and that you'd stand no chance considering that they say,
Abort the mission, soldier! I'm sorry, but you can't handle Wilhelm. Trust me.
Kid, Wilhelm nearly killed us all in New Haven without taking a scratch. If things get bad, just run.
Now, even as far back as when Yahtzee Croshaw had reviewed this game, the one major plot hole that everyone would always bring up is that the respective Vault Hunters of Borderlands 1 could be a literal eldritch god that is hellbound to eat universes, Cromarax, and the entirety of the Atlas Corporation with literal ease, but not what amounts to a souped-up loaderbot. And that Wilhelm was apparently so powerful that he was able to flush out the respective Vault Hunters out of New Haven without so much as flinching. This is usually a problem with trying to write sequential stories in which you need to raise the stakes from the previous story by making the enemy insurmountably stronger than the last, similarly to how the Star Wars sequel trilogy makes the First Order physically more powerful and ruthless than the Empire that came before it, yet also conversely more incompetent as a result, which allows the respective heroes to defeat them despite the overwhelming odds. How I would have written this scenario in which it would make sense is that the respective Vault Hunters, in a fit of arrogance seeing as they had fought off a mega corporation before, thought that they could defeat Wilhelm and all of Handsome Jack's men by themselves, before getting their asses handed to them. Then, that could set off the impetus for Roland to start making an army of his own, realizing that he needs more than just him and his 3 friends to fight off Handsome Jack's army. Because, by all accounts, Handsome Jack is no more powerful than your typical Hyperion personnel. But what makes him intimidating is his charisma and ruthless ambition as the spearhead behind Hyperion, while the Crimson Raiders are currently at their last gasp. That is also why Borderlands 3's story is completely fucked in terms of stakes, because they needed to amp up the sense of danger by making the respective antagonists so monumentally powerful, but also simultaneously so incompetent as not to discourage your ability to beat them, rather than make their powers or control limited to some degree that is sensible. Alas, Borderlands 2 also suffers this fault, even if the fault is merely Wilhelm's power level and not the power level of Hyperion as a whole, because even once the secret is revealed, it still doesn't add up how Wilhelm could single-handedly beat all of them, whereas these Vault Hunters in BL2 hold no problem against him. Nevertheless, in spite of Angel's concern, she says you can beat him, which should be a bit suspicious given her attitude prior. Also suspicious is that once you do defeat Wilhelm, to Roland's absolute awe, Angel says that he dropped the power core of which you can use the power of Sanctuary's shields indefinitely as per the vernacular. Despite the disappointment in not retrieving the vault key, Roland is delighted to know you at least have a power core to replace the one you got earlier, and despite Mordecai's poor intel, he apologizes and tries to make it up with, you guessed it, alcohol. You go back to Sanctuary to talk to Lieutenant Davis about the new core you brought, which ends this chapter, and where the secret will finally be revealed. So the Crimson Raiders and the Vault Hunters are on a pretty good winning streak so far. You've saved Roland from numerous attempted captures, bitch-slapped Handsome Jack's muscle, and acquired a power core that can hold against Handsome Jack's assault indefinitely. And as the story goes, beyond the convoluted capture and the Firehawk reveal, it's mostly tight in terms of its foundation. But that's going to all change with the next few scenes in this chapter, and where the story falls apart quite quickly, yet not to the same extent as Borderlands 3 does during the Promethea arc. So you proceed to swap out the old core with the new core you got, blissfully thinking things are going alright. At least until the core disappears and Angel's scream blares above, when it's Handsome Jack finally revealing his secret to be...
Angel's working for me.
Lowering Sanctuary's shields, Jack.
Now, normally I'd want to address this little tidbit, but there's some other revelations we need to get out of the way first before I tackle them one by one. Chaos ensues as Lieutenant Davis gets blasted by the moonshot with Sanctuary undefended, as Roland and Lilith scramble to find a solution. One such ridiculous enough, it might just work. Scooter needs you to cycle the ignition primers like you did the last time in the panic, as Lilith proceeds to use her powers to charge up the means of which to make it fly. While the bombardment continues, Roland gets pinned in some debris and you have to collect the iridium yourself and deliver it to Lilith, in spite of her growing dependency on it. Meanwhile, Handsome Jack reveals some other twists up his sleeve, stating that he deliberately wanted you to survive the train crash and that he tricked the original Vault Hunters to open the Vault of the Destroyer in Borderlands 1. Again, I'll address this, but we need to get all the eggs in the basket before we count them. You retrieve the iridium to Lilith, to which she accidentally teleports you off Sanctuary a fair distance away, as you witness the Sanctuary flying and proceeding to teleport away, much to Handsome Jack's surprise. In fact, The revelation of Lilith still being alive completely thwarts his plan to eliminate the Crimson Raiders, and you in the process, which I think is the point where I can finally bring up all the issues regarding this to task. To start, people mainly bringing this up as an issue of it being a retcon for Borderlands 1, perhaps the biggest retcon derived from Borderlands 2 that Handsome Jack was pulling the strings the whole time. Although, given that said ending showed that Angel wasn't quite who she was selling herself to be, and was presumably projecting herself from a Hyperion satellite, would at least elucidate the idea that she has it in with Hyperion. No, my issue with this comes from what Handsome Jack says about wanting you to survive the train crash from the beginning, which is something he couldn't have possibly manipulated to make it so you would, nor even anticipated as such. Like, if you were to die from it, what would he do exactly? Granted, he wouldn't necessarily be in a worse off position given that Claptrap would still be digging in dirt, and the Crimson Raiders would be in the dirt by the time their old core would wear off. The only thing that would change is that he wouldn't be able to get a bead on Lilith and Roland specifically. Speaking of Lilith, Handsome Jack's attempt to essentially kill all the fish in a barrel hinges on him believing Lilith to be dead, which shouldn't make sense given he can literally use Angel to find out if she was dead. In fact, there's 2 side missions called In Memoriam and Assassinate the Assassins that has Hyperion and by extension Handsome Jack at least somewhat doubtful of Lilith's death. More importantly, in the latter side mission, Handsome Jack decides to hire assassins in order to make sure of Lilith's death rather than, I don't know, using what amounts to a literal eye on the planet who already had a bead on Lilith prior, whom Lilith doesn't have any reason not to trust beyond the truth behind the original vault. Also, I find it extremely convenient that Lilith decided to go into hiding about her death that would allow Jack to think he had to jump on Sanctuary without any reason to do so. Unless Angel maybe turned on Jack and told her to subliminally go into hiding? That's another issue that becomes more apparent throughout the latter parts of the story. What Jack is aware of Angel conspiring against him seems to be extremely selective, as he will sometimes pull the plug on her, but other times completely ignore her literally spouting the means of which to fetch the vault key, and not stop her in any way from doing so. Another part of Jack's ploy also hinges on the Vault Hunters not remembering that Jack and Wilhelm beat the key out of Tannis, who you gave it to at the end of Borderlands 1, which would contradict the lead of it being on a train line presumably on the way to said vault. Unless again you could assume that Jack didn't want the key in the vault to be in the same place, and had it smuggled elsewhere until he was absolutely ready to use it by the Crimson Raiders assessment? At least with these issues and contrivances, you can at least make some concessions to them, but nevertheless are issues regarding this whole secret. One final chink about this secret is something Roland brought up earlier, that Jack was charging the key with Iridium in order to fetch the warrior. Now, without this pre-sequel muddying up that motivation, we can reasonably assume that Jack knew of the warrior and destroyer during the events of Borderlands 1, and wanted the original Vault Hunters to fight it in order to use that Iridium to control the warrior. But because the pre-sequel has it where Jack at his position is nothing more than a low-level programmer than the CEO of Hyperion he is currently, and has no knowledge of the warrior, makes the motivation of him wanting the original Vault Hunters to open said vault more confusing. Was it purely just for the Iridium? Was it to shove it in the face of Atlas, a corporation that went so down under he got their license for a pittance? How did he manage to accomplish that in his position and use a Hyperion satellite for Angel to use under the complete folly of Tacitor and the Hyperion higher-ups? Was he doing it under the bidding of Tacitor and said higher-ups? To be fair, all of these issues are a fault of the pre-sequel and not Borderlands 2 specifically, but it certainly doesn't help it being canonized into the lore as to how Jack got the way that he is. But for as convoluted as all of this was, I'm still mostly invested in it, because unlike Tyreen, who seems to want to tell you every secret without any means of which to kill you afterwards, Handsome Jack only spills his secret specifically expecting you to die afterwards. His utter surprise at Lilith having thwarted that plan is all the more telling that he wasn't expecting you to, and I think there is at least some benefit of the doubt with his knowledge, as well as the knowledge of the Crimson Raiders, that can allow this to happen. More importantly, he being a soothsayer isn't the case either. He had already gained your trust vicariously through Angel in order to believe you are alive for a reason, and that the core was as advertised in spite of the misdirection of the paper trail. And the fact that Angel can see all via the satellite also allows uniquely in Handsome Jack's case to be a soothsayer in regards to whatever is happening on Pandora at present. Which is where I find myself conflicted. I don't believe the Calypsos should have an encyclopedia of knowledge of past, present, and future, yet despite them having such, don't use it or use it poorly, yet Handsome Jack earns his vast knowledge, yet never utilizes it when it would benefit him. I don't want to contradict myself in saying that Handsome Jack being omniscient is okay where the Calypsos aren't, because then I also must concede that when Handsome Jack isn't aware of what's happening, that calls into question his presence around Angel, whom would be facilitating that, or that's okay for the Calypsos to act as though you can fix something that you're not even aware of how it's broken. I think the way in which I can clarify this difference is that everything the Calypsos knows is all future tense, whereas Handsome Jack is all present tense. The Calypsos already know of the Promethean vault that was never opened, or at least shouldn't be by Typhon's account, already know how to charge the Great Vault with a siren they had not anticipated in coming across, as well as conflicting with their previous means to do so, and already know the threat of the machine to their goals in spite of Typhon never telling them its purpose. So I hope that at least allows you to understand why I let Jack slide when it comes to certain things happening, whereas I don't with the Calypsos. Okay, after that whole ordeal to comb over, of course with the location of Sanctuary unknown and you being stranded, it's off to relocate it as Angel tries to confide in you despite the betrayal. Again, the theme of betrayal is steeped in the story, but we'll get more on that as we go on. Angel detects that Sanctuary moved to the Highlands and that you'll have to go through the fridge in order to get there. Now, far be it of me to put myself in the position of the Vault Hunters and assume that everything Angel is saying is either being said verbatim through Handsome Jack or just a straight out lie. Why exactly should we take any more advice from her? How do we not know she's leading us into a blatant death trap from our miraculous misteleport? Fuck it, the story says, and that's one major contrivance that the story allows to happen that I simply cannot defend, even if you can hear the sincerity in Angel's voice. On the way, Handsome Jack thanks you for taking the bait of his in order to, at least from his own mouth, misdirect Roland from attacking his iridium mines to charge said vault key. Which I guess was the primary motivation of the fake lead, I suppose? Assuming you had died in said train crash, which would make him saying that he wanted you to survive it be contradictory to that, but again, maybe he just decided after finding out you were still alive? Also, if he was just planning on killing you anyway, why did he even bother to go through what amounts to his analysis of you via echoes scattered across in the later levels of the game? I get he was just rounding up all the Vault Hunters to kill the competition, but why would he need a dissertation on whether they're fit for his execution? More importantly, one of these is of a fucking siren, which would be more circumstantial to how Jack goes about charging the vault, which would pepper more holes into his decision to try to kill you, but not really, lol. Anyway, we got a sanctuary to find. With the first act of this story told, we as the respective players are left to figure out how the story will ramp itself up from the crescendo of the first. And boy does it, considering the respective mood change of our antagonists, as well as the stakes getting increasingly more dire as the weight of it starts to fall on our protagonist's shoulders. But right now, it's currently at a freeze, both literally and figuratively, as the means to the fridge is blocked off by ice as Angel stops herself short of cursing again and proceeds to thaw the way through. Furthermore, Angel begins to piece together how Jack's plan went about, assuming you couldn't already reasonably assume that the power core had some kind of uplink that Jack could use to order the defense shutdown, but also of his plan from the very beginning of Borderlands 1. As I had alluded to earlier, Jack's initial interest in having the original Vault Hunters opening the Vault of the Destroyer was a means of which to make a killing off the Iridium, which is still confusing given his status as Hyperion at the events of the pre-sequel, which predate BL2 but postdate BL1 if the title wasn't a clear giveaway, as well as his knowledge of the vaults at that level. Also, given the pre-sequel, I don't find Angel's reasoning to be congruent with the way Jack goes about hiring the pre-sequel Vault Hunters, even if you can assume that Jack had this insidious guise that he hid up until he got royally fucked over by our protagonist in Borderlands 2, as he seemed completely upfront with his intentions. Also, this is completely assuming everything Angel is saying is true and not just being spoken verbatim by Jack, but if not, where in San Diego is Jack at not keeping an eye or ear on her? Major contrivances aside, we must make haste regardless if we should even believe the demigod in our head was just a puppet for Jack all along. This is especially problematic as Angel says,
"But if you're going to stop Jack from controlling the warrior, you'll need my help. Because I know where the key is. It's with me."
While also making clear that you indeed have no reason to trust her after that little stunt she pulled. Because if she is telling the truth, then Jack would absolutely make sure to pull the plug on that info so they don't have a chance of getting it. But if not, then Jack is deliberately leading you into yet another trap like he did before. That's the problem with this contrivance. A character we should have no reason to trust gives out information that an antagonist should have no reason to give unless he was spoon-feeding yet more lies for his schemes, which circles back into why we wouldn't trust said character to begin with. Past the fridge and into the Highlands, you witness the Sanctuary making its final stop near above from its epic teleportation, and also coincidentally enough, not being fired at. Because as far as I'm concerned, the Sanctuary still has no shields of note, and that there shouldn't be any reason as to why Handsome Jack can't just redirect the moonshot bombardment to a different coordinate. Unless the excuse is that he can't target a hovering / floating object, and only one that is grounded on the Earth, which is still bullshit because of arc trajectory. It's never once brought up in the story why the moonshot bombardments don't work anymore. They simply don't exist for the rest of the story in spite of there being no clear reason why they wouldn't work. Another interesting contrivance bringing up a mechanic that is treated simply as non-canon is that you cannot fast travel to Sanctuary as a result of its location being changed intermittent, which requires you to make a signal via Overlook to relocate it. As it's already been confirmed by the writers that things like the fast travel network and new use stations are treated simply as non-canon, puts a huge sore on this plot development as it's mentioned and poses an obstacle for our respective heroes, when by and large them existing would pose some huge risks for both hero and foe alike. Like for example, if there is a fast travel network for say, I don't know, the exact fucking place that Handsome Jack is drilling into to get to the vault, our heroes could just take that and storm it without needing to dance through hoops to find it like they do in the story. And conversely, Handsome Jack could literally send the whole kitchen sink of robots straight to Sanctuary if he already has coordinates to bomb them with moonshots as previously established. As I said, Borderlands 2's story is solid at the start, but falters real fast in the middle and only regains some composure towards its final third. But that's the state currently at hand. You need to get a lunar supply beacon from one of the extraction plants that Hyperion has stored, meaning you have to fight through more Hyperion personnel and of a Thresher who eats one of them. One thing that I am thankful about BL3 is that they didn't bring back those motherfuckers, while Handsome Jack is blissfully unaware of what you got planned. Both Lilith and Roland, especially the latter, display annoyance that all of their efforts in the previous game were basically being played like a fiddle for Handsome Jack's ploy. Boy, if only Roland were around to see that their efforts in BL1 are even more vain during the events of BL3. Whoops. Almost spoiled something there. Something about Handsome Jack that I do want to go over is that up until this moment, he has been entirely unfazed and cool-headed about what was going on in the first act, given that most of what he was doing was saying about his means to kill all of you. Now that that didn't work, his character starts to go through a little change. He starts to express some annoyance and frustration in your refusal to die, with one of the most absolutely hilarious monologues from him delivered in uproarious fashion.
Example, this one guy in New Haven, right? City's burning, people are dying left and right, yada yada yada. This jackal rushes me with a spoon. A freaking spoon, and I'm dying laughing, right? So So I scoop out his stupid little eyeballs with it, and his kids are all, wah! And I can't even, he can't see where he's going. He's bumping into stuff, and anyway, I don't know, maybe you guys will do that. The moral is, you're a total bitch.
More importantly, in spite of how Jack went about killing the residents of New Haven, he still views himself a hero of this given story, and that, given heroes always defeat the villain, he believes your loss is inevitable but wishes it would come sooner. Once you got the lunar supply beacon set up, Jack finally acknowledges Angel trying to help you and tries, in vain, to put a stop to it. There are some lines from Angel that implies that Jack isn't physically present near her to know whether she's working against him or not, which might call into question where exactly Jack is as the preceding events play out, which was a huge issue that I brought up with the Calypsos in BO3. Obviously, it's not as clear as I'd like, but here at least there's 3 definitive locations that Jack is likely at as the events play out, but I can't describe them yet for benefit of making this analysis spoiler city. Anyhow, Jack proceeds to send out loader bots to destroy the lunar beacon and you, as Angel has to fiddle around with some data to put you at top priority to make a fast travel uplink, which adds a bit of questionable ethics as Angel mentions T-Bone Junction being fucked out of medical supplies as a result of this tentative decision. But given Angel is already in the ropes with one of the best video game antagonists since Andrew Ryan, it's kind of hard for me to blame her for doing so, even with Handsome Jack's increased annoyance at her routing against him. Now, after you finally routed the fast travel connection back to Sanctuary, and Handsome Jack very sternly scolding Angel for what she did, you would assume that that would be the last we heard from Angel, right? I mean, if I were Jack, knowing my puppet isn't playing to my tune anymore, I would most certainly pull the plug on her as a contingency, but nope. At least not as soon as you would think, given just how much info Angel is able to come forward with before finally gaining the leash for it. Also of note, is that Lilith and Roland actually bring up the issue I had regarding the lack of a shield once you make it back to Sanctuary, that Jack could just change the coordinates of the lunar bombardment to their new location and fire away, but unfortunately, how that issue gets nipped in the bud will just have to be saved for the next chapter. In spite of how serendipitous a mass teleportation was, Roland and the gang are still in a bundle given they have no clues as to the location of the vault key or the warrior. Of course, Angel imparts some knowledge, very important knowledge of such that I am absolutely screaming as to why the fuck Jack doesn't cut the line between her. Because of all this hinges on Lilith and Roland deciding to trust this info she's giving when they wouldn't have any reason to trust her instincts prior. And if it's bullshit, well, we go right back to square one in this absolute contrivance to allow our heroes even a smidgen of a leg up. Regardless of that, Angel informs you that Jack is using her to power the key to expedite the opening of the Vault of the Warrior, as it also follows the same rules as the Vault of the Destroyer. Whether any of the other vaults described after that fact follow that same rule is uncertain. It's just only convenient in Jack's case that he can do this when it's never been common knowledge from the first game, which is one of the more damning retcons that Borderlands 2 suffers from as a result. Her control core is nestled in Thousand Cuts, which is guarded by 3 heavy security measures that to you and the Crimson Raiders seems infeasible, which is also the impetus for why they trust her input, given if she had wanted you to walk into a trap, it would have sounded more plausible. One extra notation Angel imparts is that Lilith absolutely cannot enter her chambers. Of course, given Lilith's headstrong nature, she doesn't take that advice particularly well and insists she'll come anyway. Now, of course, the reason Angel says that has something to do with how the vault key is charged, but if it was truly in Angel's best interest to ensure that contingency wouldn't happen, she would tell them who she really is. But nope, she doesn't and keeps the suggestion deliberately vague, both to add suspense to when you do find out, and for Lilith to want to go anyway, which, as a result of that contrivance, allows something significant to happen that starts the third act. But I can't give away what yet. But keep this in mind. This lack of elaborating sets about a domino effect of significant plot elements that severely damage the somewhat straightforward story as a result, as it entirely hinges on that alone. So it's off to find the means to take down the security measures, the first being the Hyperion Competitor Deterrence Field, or Death Wall for short. Roland has you head out to the Hyperion Exploitation Preserve, where you'll also meet with Mordecai again, who has his own issues to deal with. Why exactly Mordecai is here or why Roland sent him here is unknown, and it kind of makes me think Roland had read part of the script himself and already knew to go fetch a software upgrade for Claptrap in order to disable that death wall. According to Mordecai, after Sanctuary got teleported, he and Bloodwing went to scout a Hyperion convoy that turned out to be, you guessed it, another trap that ended up with Bloodwing nabbed at the Exploitation Preserve and Mordecai scouting about. Also convenient is that Bloodwing also just so happened to have been affixed with a collar with the aforementioned chip upgrade you need, and why that was there is completely up in the smoke other than to add tension for Mordecai. Because while I did say that Mordecai was more of a caricature of himself compared to the first game, he does get some sort of arc that feels his motivations in later side quests of him, and also rings true the theme of Handsome Jack making an enemy out of nearly everybody. At the start, Mordecai is cool and collected about Bloodwing's capture, certain that she'll be fine given what they've been through. But as it turns out, he's a lot more worried than he lets on, especially when you start picking up the trail, busting through more Hyperion and Stalkers through the shipyard and the preserve. This is also the start of where you get to know Jack's obsession with Iridium having trickled into psychic experimentation, both with the local fauna of Stalkers and of the captured Bloodwing herself. Into the observation wing, Handsome Jack lets go of Bloodwing, who through the experimentation has become almost rabid and starts attacking you. Of course, you have to defend yourself in spite of Mordecai's pleading, suggesting a tranquilizer after you soften her up a bit, and Roland pragmatically asserts that if need be, she's going to have to die in order to defeat Jack, at any cost. After you've roughed her up, Mordecai does manage to get that tranq on her, allowing you to get that chip. Unfortunately for him, however, Jack also remembers what element he was missing out of the lot he was quipping about during the fight, as the collar was also an explosive failsafe that blows off Bloodwing's head as soon as you grab it, much to Mordecai's dismay and rage. The scene itself plays off seriously, in spite of Handsome Jack's quipping, which he of all would fit thematically to do so, especially when Mordecai starts shooting in a bloodthirsty rage when Jack tries to kill you with more loader bots on your way out. This balance between serious and playful is more delicately handled here than most scenes in Borderlands 3, and especially with Handsome Jack, he doesn't make a habit of having to remind you of who he just killed like you've got secondhand Alzheimer's throughout, unlike with Tyreen and Troy. More importantly, this sets off in motion a number of quests involving trying to free the trapped fauna in the preserve out of justice for Bloodwing, as well as a spiral of alcoholism to drown away his sorrows thereafter. I think I've made it abundantly clear in the last video, but I'll reiterate here, that each character in this story has a particular beef with Handsome Jack, either orchestrated by himself or by Hyperion as a whole, which impacts their motivations to take him down. Unlike with the Calypsos, who beyond Ava, Lilith, and Vaughn never personally slight anyone. Even if the circumstances involving the placement of said collar is a bit arbitrary even if used to trade lives, had this not played out, it would really make me question why Mordecai even cares about taking down Jack beyond just sharing ancillary motivations with his friends. It's honestly remarkable that the majority of both new and old characters get a good deal of motivations as to why they hate Handsome Jack, for a story that is only half as long as Borderlands 3, if you only follow the main story beats. It really goes to show that length isn't everything. But then comes more problems with Borderlands 2 with the again aforementioned forced humor, with Handsome Jack trying to play some requiem for Bloodwing horribly with a violin, out of his own amusement and not yours. You give Claptrap the software upgrade, which allows him to be invisible, unfortunately only temporarily, and with that out of the way as to how we'll deal with the other two safeguards for the bunker. As for clearing up that issue regarding the potentiality of moonshot bombardments on Sanctuary, yeah, I was lying. There was no clearing up that issue. It's exactly as I stated before, never addressed for the convenience of it not being an issue, but the respective heroes can mention it like as if they've resolved it, while doling out exposition about Bloodwing to make you forget that happened. You know, speaking of people we forgot, there's still one other character from Borderlands 1 not accounted for. In dealing with the second hurdle of the bunker, Roland gives you a note that he wants you to send to the Slab King as a favor to ask, as he was previously exiled from the Crimson Raiders' entourage for his unorthodox means to beat out information on Hyperion. This is all in an effort to get some help busting through the bunker's main line of defenses, which also so happens to be nestled in the same place you are going to send said note. A bit curious how Rowan and Lilith weren't aware of the purpose of this bunker before Angel spilled the beans on that, or even at least morbidly curious about it, but nonetheless, you press on. The Slab King mistakes you for a Hyperion assassin coming to kill him, which results in you having to fight through his band forces to get to him. In betwixt the fighting, the Slab King also goes off on a tangent about why he is the way he is towards Hyperion as a result of his beloved dog being killed in front of him, embracing the bandit label they have fixed onto him. As clunky as past exposition goes, unfortunately for us, this particular conflict with him isn't further addressed outside of the side quests in Lynchwood, nor really brought up as a point of contention for the morality of the Crimson Raiders as a whole. Which is a shame given just how much they could have done with this, but given that we are already 2/3 into the story and only now just been introduced to this character that far in, I guess they couldn't squeeze that dynamic in. After realizing that you aren't a Hyperion assassin, instead the Slab King has you go through initiation, which is basically no different to what you were doing up until you come up to him. Which makes the process of even being a slab extremely muddled if being one requires you to kill others. But this is a contrivance purely for gameplay's sake, reminding me yet again of issues regarding BL3's story, to a lesser extent. Once you survive the gauntlet, the Slab King reveals himself to be none other than Brick, the fourth and final returning character from Borderlands 1. A bit of a late entry too nonetheless, even if justified by his past actions according to Roland. Although, like I said earlier, his late entry does cause us a bind in which we don't get to explore his descent further to bandithood, when it's honestly very interesting how Handsome Jack and the Sheriff of Lynchwood had mentally traumatized Brick to become a bandit, vindicating Jack's mentality on bandit kind as a whole. And we also don't get to really explore the possible schism that Roland and Brick had in regards to dealing with Hyperion, as it's resolved soon as you bring that note to Brick. He happily obliges with giving you buzzards of which to assault the bunker. Those will become an issue later on, hold that thought. Without a shred of hesitation in the decision, but to give credence where due, at least BL2 gives the illusion of there being a conflict rather than having none such implied at all in Borderlands 3, where it would fit otherwise. As easy as it would seem to skip back to Sanctuary with Brick on your side, Jack has other plans. He starts bombarding targeting beacons at the Slab camp as you and Brick try to destroy them. This particular plot point brings up more issues regarding Jack's means of launching bombardment. He didn't need them prior to when he was shooting Sanctuary on the ground, at least there wasn't any clear indication of one being there to begin with, so why does he need them now in order to target a given place? And if so, why would that stop him from sending one down on Sanctuary? Sure, they could get rid of it, but assuming Jack has almost nigh infinite resources to make more to send on down, it would be irrelevant to him. The only defense that could steelman this contrivance is that the mortars of which are being fired are from the bunker itself and not from Helios, which is more of an issue of clarification rather than contrivance. But unless that is the case, this is a retcon in its own story as it plays along. As for Handsome Jack himself, his increasing annoyance and frustration as his plans not going, well, to plan, continue his arc in a neat trajectory, especially once you've destroyed all the beacons. His breaking point will come soon enough once the second act of the story takes hold. Anyhow, you return back to Sanctuary, to which Roland and Brick exchange a few words, one key sentence being,
Times changed. We need all the help we can get.
Even from a bloodthirsty psychopath?
Who called you that? Jack?
No. You did. 3 years ago.
Now, given Roland said earlier that he didn't approve of Brick's methods of dealing with Hyperion, and Borderlands 2 takes place 5 years after Borderlands 1, that means that the pre-sequel's events would have had to taken at least not more than 2 years after the events of Borderlands 1, seeing as Jack didn't get his current namesake and mentality until the end of those events. which is quite a short amount of time for Hyperion to have started work on Helios, for Handsome Jack to take control of Hyperion and to start wreaking havoc across Pandora far enough to mentally tarnish Brick to force Roland's hand to exile him from his ranks, while Roland himself was making an army to fight against Jack. What I'm getting at is, the pre-sequel was never really sussed out to coincide with the events of Borderlands 2, in spite of how much it tries to clarify certain loose ends, but all that aside, these are issues with the pre-sequel that I'm certain I will cover too in future. I just find it interesting how lines like these, even if seeming to be insignificant, can really put to task some glaring issues with the continuity of the Borderlands series. But let's continue slugging it along to bypass the third hurdle. So the means to bypass the third hurdle, getting a voice confirmation of Jack himself, seems daunting even for Roland to figure out. But never fear, Angel is here, because you would think after what you've done so far that Jack would start to get a bit suspicious about what you got planned, and especially given Angel has already disobeyed his orders to cut her off by now. I know that some of you will reason that he's not too harsh to her because of what kind of relationship they have, but I'll explain why that reason is bullshit once that secret too is spilled. Anyhow, Angel wants you to go to the city of Opportunity, a in-progress beacon of light, as Handsome Jack puts it, nestled in the Highlands, that also houses some body doubles of his. Now, the reason for Jack to have lookalikes of him wasn't too convoluted when first introduced, given he's the head of a very powerful company and likely needed diversions to take away from those who would try to excommunicate him, as well as to appease those who do work under him. But farther down along the line, it got exceedingly more confusing why Handsome Jack had a whole gaggle of body doubles of his, or having one at such a low position of his during the pre-sequel itself. Shenanigans with the DLC of Borderlands 3 and of the pre-sequel aside, you head on over to Opportunity, to which you also find that Handsome Jack has also taken credit for destroying the Destroyer single-handedly, which I can only assume he did out of spite what with the events of the pre-sequel, if he was more interested in having someone else do his dirty work. But I think that does coincide pretty well with his arc in parts of the pre-sequel, where he was doing bad things with the best of intentions and good things without the desire to be a hero. Horribly inverse farther down along the line with his penchant for power and his slowly eroding sanity. In Opportunity, you go kill one of the body doubles and grab a pocket watch that serves as a way for Handsome Jack to emulate his mannerisms to those beneath him, as Angel puts it, as well as audio recordings of him scattered about Opportunity with some humorous dialogue of Jack that you need to imitate his voice via the bioscan reading. After getting some samples, Angel decrypts the information into a voice modulator that will make you sound like Jack up until you get to that aforementioned hurdle, which again adds some humorous moments depending on who you're playing as.
Man, this whole speaking with the voice of an older man thing is nowhere near as hot as I thought it would be.
And then, only until now, does Jack finally put the brakes on Angel's attempts to sabotage his plan. Well after you've gone every hurdle dealt with, at least if Angel is being honest, which she must be if Jack is hurting her like this. Maybe you could reason that Jack doesn't think you know what actually lies in the bunker, given he's the one who made it, and that what information Angel gave out wouldn't be sufficient enough to stop his plan, but given his whole plan hinges on delicate information being spoon-fed out, and that your plan hinges on whether said delicate information is discreet enough, but not too dishonest, neither scenario should be happening given the circumstances. So Angel is cut off for now, and you return to Sanctuary, to which you catch wind of a conversation of Roland pulling his foot down, telling Lilith to stay put if this whole ordeal is a trap, but also likely because of what Angel said earlier about having Lilith not enter her chambers. I'm sure a lot of people do get annoyed at this particular plot thread, as Lilith is being a dumbass for no reason, but I think her arrogant and headstrong nature is pretty consistent throughout, so I don't think it's a direct character assassination, nor is it inconsistent to the presentation of her character thus far. What is troubling about this is that Angel is deliberately cryptic with why she doesn't want Lilith to enter, when there's absolutely no reason why she can't explain why, unless it's because Majek might be watching, which didn't stop her from telling you literally how to get into the bunker to begin with. But with all the pieces in place, and the assault soon in order, I can't spill the beans on what that detail is, but you will find out soon in the next chapter. In spite of having to traipse through many contrivances and questions alike, Handsome Jack's selective awareness of Angel's exploits outside of playing puppet to him notwithstanding, we are finally at haste to make the assault on the bunker. In a similar pragmaticism to Lilith, Roland also wants Mordecai to stay in spite of vengeance being hot on his tongue for the same reason he told Lilith, in case this whole plan is a trap. Brick gets the benefit of coming with so he can command the buzzard assault on the ground defenses of the bunker, while you make the assault on foot, while Roland presumably climbs the outside of the bunker into the control core. While Mordecai is a bit reticent, he acclimates much more to Roland's suggestion, even with as near suicidal as his whole mission is. Unbelievably, Claptrap, out of all the major Borderlands titles, actually serves some kind of purpose in the plot, even if negligible here, compared to being a ear tumor disguised as slapstick comedy, as he's important in disabling said death wall, as Claptrap also assumes that Jack attacked Sanctuary simply because he was present. Why Claptrap managed to survive being discontinued is all down to the issues regarding the pre-sequel's ending, or just slides of the epilogue of all things. But even if we reason that he could survive, why would a discoed robot still have access simply because he's Hyperion by association? But that's just one of the several issues regarding said death wall. Once you go to 1,000 cuts to start the assault, the death wall itself seems precariously just that, a 10-foot barrier. Now, given buzzards exist in this universe and you just enlisted the help of them via Brick, why couldn't you just hitch a ride on one of them and skip the death wall entirely? Moreover, said skipping of it would make Bloodwing's death not even happen, or that entire arc for that matter, as it hinges on said acquiring of the software upgrade. Unless the death wall only aesthetically looks like it blocks a garage door surface area, but in actuality works like a dome coating the entire bunker, then I'd be fine with this contrivance. But if it doesn't, it makes an entire plot point completely pointless simply because mechanically you can't fly the buzzards in BL2. Now, where have I heard of entire oodles of time in game being squandered by one simple line or plot detail admitted prior?
See, I was planning to Legion of Vault Monsters start you myself, but then you handed us your stupid siren friend and now Troy can just use Iridium.
Getting through the death wall proved to be only the easy part. Multiple turret defense systems, loader bots, and an onslaught of mortar strikes soon coat your path onward. In spite of Handsome Jack's frustrations, he's still unfazed if a bit conceited in his arrogance, believing full well the bunker will destroy you. You get through the initial bombardment and start to head on upwards before Handsome Jack imparts some wisdom that I feel would have been better utilized early in the story, as he exclaims how he and Wilhelm acquired the vault key while displaying a completely warped sense of heroism as mercy to spare his so-called villains from death. Knowing this bit of detail early on would understand what happened to the vault key having been stolen, why Tannis was in Sanctuary despite her antisocial nature, as well as further vindicate Handsome Jack's morality in the arc. But here, it just comes off as a weird one-off when you're at haste to arrive at Control Core Angel. Once to the higher reaches of the bunker, Angel remarkably makes contact with you again to remind you that the final force field into the control core must be disabled by destroying the bunker, which turns out to be not a place, but a defense bot in of itself, the biggest that you've fought yet. Yeah, about Angel not being clear about spilling details when there's literally no reason why she can't, this little clarification would have helped, and it was only convenient that you had air support and destroyed the autocannons that you're even at level to fight this thing. What if Brick's air support went kaput? Or, worse yet, what if the slabs only helped you get to the upper reaches? And I'm not going to buy the excuse that Angel couldn't explain. She's only been stopped once ever, and there has been no explanation thus far as to how much time she can spare turning on Jack. As I said, her being able to completely upend Jack's plan, while also conveniently not giving you key details that will be substantial in the third arc, seriously damage aspects of the story that would have been better dealt with if we knew the circumstances of her spreading information and disinformation. But nevertheless, despite the huge obstacle out of the way, you manage to defeat the bunker itself, which gives you access to the last hurdle, to which Angel tells you the password to iterate in Jack's voice.
The password is, I love you.
That voice modulator had better work or this will all be for nothing.
I love you.
Access granted.
As that line should already foretell, Angel, to Jack, is a lot more than he lets on. But hold on to your tuckus, cause there's a whole lot of other revelations that will hit us like a train and make soup out of our brain if you hadn't been paying attention to some of the other hints that I've given up to this point. Especially intense is Handsome Jack's mannerisms, as he's gone from just playful insults to serious threats, as the tone of his voice goes from calm to maddening, further foreshadowing for what's to come once you do enter the control core. Down the perilous elevator to control core Angel again imparts some wisdom as to the mechanisms of the vault key. Most importantly, that it needs a particular catalyst to open it, one being of a siren. But what siren could Jack have stationed at control core Angel, you might ask? Well, the siren that happens to be was staring you right at the face the whole fucking time. Angel. To emphasize this, the means of acquiring the vault key are a bit complicated, as you need to destroy said catalyst expediting the process, that being Angel herself. Which makes exactly what I said prior about Angel not imparting important wisdom stupid, and only to serve as the big twist when in any other circumstance she should have given how important it is for Jack to open the vault of the warrior. There's also another caveat to this omitting of information regarding Lilith's behavior that also damaged this plot point, but we'll get to that cutscene in a moment. For now, Angel tells you that you need to damage the iridium injectors that are basically her life supply just before she gets pulled away back in her hub, as Jack also reveals that Angel is his daughter on top of being his puppet in a threatening manner. Now, up until this point, you're probably already well aware of the fact that Jack is Angel's father, considering that it's not really a secret up to this point given the age of the game, as well as side missions in BL3 and Tales from the Borderlands already spoon-feeding that secret home. I kept this bit secret both for the benefit of those who either aren't familiar with the Borderlands story as of recent, as well as those who've never touched any of the Borderlands games, but most importantly regarding why Jack not stopping Angel from spilling the beans on how to reach her to be dumb. Because if Jack truly does love Angel, and that his warped psychosis only made him treat her like a weapon to squash his enemies, he would absolutely make sure that she would not be killed, both because of his maternal love of her, as well as being his only means to open the vault itself. I never buy the argument of arrogance, especially when it comes to enemies with a clear motive and ethics in mind derailing said arrogance, and Jack, for as loving to hate as he is unloved to be hated, is severely damaged because of his allowance of her to spoon-feed info. I would have bought it much better if Angel was sending out cryptic shit that Jack assumed was her tricking them, only picking the pieces soon after of her betrayal, or that Angel only had a very small window to give out info, but not in detail, so as to keep the Crimson Raiders in the dark about her true intentions. But with Angel having so embellished info without any interruption makes Jack's awareness of her truly muddled, as well as his presence around her, even in the segment of which you are quite literally pulling the plug on her, as Jack haplessly watches, pleads, threatens, and balls all at once while you do so, when he had apparently no problem making an example out of her in opportunity, or when he was experimenting on Bloodwing at the Exploitation Preserve. All of that being said, does this segment carry the emotional weight that both Angel and Jack are currently facing, even in the face of the contrivances we know? Of course. But the journey is much more interesting than the destination, and I feel that no one would take any issue with the way in which the plot pieces built up to this moment would be damaged if they made sense while also carrying the emotional resonance home. When has a piece of media or movie ever bothered you simply because it made sense in its own continuity? That's right, it's never happened, because even the worst that a movie or piece of media has to offer will always allot people who want to find reason in why it could make sense. Look at the various ways that I tried to give even the slightest of credence to BL3's story, for crying out loud. I'm trying to make the madness make sense in its own universe. But there's only so many concessions I can make to bad writing when it just becomes that, bad writing. So whether or not I find Handsome Jack's own down spiral into madness as he watches his own daughter being killed at her own request and trying to emotionally manipulate you and her in the process to be extremely compelling, doesn't deter me to recognize how we arrived here on such a rocky foundation. Needless to say, Roland makes his appearance on Control Car Angel known, merely to facilitate overriding the shields blocking your means to destroy the iridium injectors, as Roland can only swallow at the revelation that Angel is a siren too. Of course, another thing about this whole scene elicits is whether or not Handsome Jack truly does care about Angel more so than being his way to take revenge on Pandora, so to speak. I've always believed it to be about 50-50, that he does care, but because his mind has become so warped by the hero complex and wanting to perpetuate that through heinous acts, that his own motivations betray his sincerity towards Angel, which admittedly, Borderlands 3 did replicate very well in said side mission I mentioned in Borderlands 3. Unfortunately, however, certain side quests like Get to Know Jack will also be retconned in Borderlands 3 and twisted in a different perspective, similarly to another game most infamous for doing such things. But I believe, even in the interest of making Handsome Jack a villain, that the writers wanted you to know the why to his motivations rather than the what, unlike Commandant Steele, who is just a forgotten heel and nothing more. Going on about Handsome Jack's ramblings, it paints a very stark contrast to his cool, collected, and boisterous attitude when you first heard him at Southern Shelf. He has been broken down to his barest parts, the true veneer of a man twisted by fate to do horrible things on behalf of himself and of his daughter, to the extent that he'll even hurt his own daughter if it means he's protecting her from how horrible he perceives others to be. His hero complex and egomania was just a smokescreen, or a mask to be more apt, to hide the demented and twisted ball of hate he truly is, and it was only until you prodded him further did that guys finally give in. It is at once both villainous but also human in nature, to want to build yourself upon the pedestal of someone you can never be, desperate to build it by the blood and straw of your enemies, believing yourself so righteous in the cause. It is ironic to consider that the cycle of betrayal that I mentioned earlier would come back to haunt Handsome Jack, that his own flesh and blood would betray him because of the very acts of betrayal he committed on behalf of protecting her, or at least as he believes it to be the reason, and that now everything he did to give her a life he never had would be spat in the face of the means to do so. It is truly what makes a villain the most compelling when they believe the means to justify the end from their own upbringing. But I feel like I'm saving the best analysis of Handsome Jack's character a little too early, even if we are close to the third act of the story. So 2 of the iridium injectors have been destroyed, but unfortunately the means to reach the third have been cut off from Roland. Fortunately for the plot, and of Angel's lack of discretion, Lilith appears, who ignored Roland's plea to stay at Sanctuary both to fight for him and to teleport him to the last panel to override the last injector shield. You finally get the last injector destroyed, which means you've also killed Angel in the process, but not before she can finally curse Jack's name before dying out. So you would think that would be it, right? Handsome Jack's means to open the vault are now out of the option, and the vault key is safe in your hands, and surely, if Jack wanted to intervene, he would have done so now, right? But because he hasn't, it should just be safe on back to Sanctuary too. Well, if you already know Angel is Jack's daughter, then surely you know what comes next. So soon after you've killed Angel, the cutscene soon plays out where Roland is elated that Jack had lost his only means to awaken the warrior as he starts laying out his battle plan as expected. But alas, things aren't that peachy keen, for as soon as he does say that, he's shot dead square in his sternum from behind by Jack, killing him instantly as you're pocked with blood on your face. Lilith reacts as you would expect, both sad and angry, but before she can get the drop on him, Jack slaps some weird contraption on her neck, which seems to completely nullify her ability to even fight back, before addressing you personally. Presumably, with the collar on Lilith, he now has inadvertent control of her, serving as a contingency for when and if Angel were to die, and upon his first request demands Lilith kill you and your posse. Lilith starts phase grasping, but just barely denies Jack the pleasure by teleporting you all the way back to Sanctuary, the farthest she's ever teleported someone thus far. As soon as you are back, Mordecai is somehow aware of the goings-on, as he also reacts in a very angry fashion, and needs you to get choppy to find the vault before Jack can open it. Okay, there's a lot to take in from this cutscene alone, as there is a whole host of actual problems with it, as well as supposed problems that aren't. I think first and foremost, that most have memed on to this point, is the fact that for Roland, a guy who has taken multiple shots simultaneously without flinching, is somehow killed by a single shot from the back of the sternum. In fact, this is the first major example of ludonarrative dissonance that Borderlands 2 displays, not counting the can't fly over the death wall with the buzzards bit, or the fact that the fast travel network doesn't exist, or the new U stations, where a major character is killed off by means of which they couldn't have possibly died by given the circumstances of the gameplay thus far. But hey, I guess Jack was using the Jacobs since it didn't take more than one shot, but that also is humorously contradictory given that he's the fucking CEO of Hyperion and would likely not use anything less than a fucking conference call to do the deed. But about what gun he uses? The gun is almost instantly zapped from existence as soon as he pulls the first shot, almost as if the writers had made the developers code in that sleight of hand so that your brain wouldn't recognize the fallacy of it. But they did it so quickly that the actual grip of the gun doesn't materialize before it is dematerialized, and I went through this shot by shot and noticed the silhouette of his holster clearly shows a Hyperion pistol. And given that the Hyperion line of weapons rely on high accuracy on successive shots, Jack was really confident in his ability to land that shot at breakneck pace with heavily reduced accuracy just to make a point. What I'm saying is, the circumstances of Roland's death are heavily contrived to add suspense to the watcher in question, and Jack's means to kill Roland are equally ludicrous. On to the second issue with this that many will retroactively call out, given the moments of retardation in the cutscenes of Borderlands 3, primarily of the fact that you and the 4 Vault Hunters don't immediately start blasting away at Jack as soon as he makes his appearance known. Because for all want of praising how Jack does formally make his presence known to you, you can make the argument that these 4 aren't going to be much for talking, given how he's tried to kill them time and time again. But another argument that I can also make that is legitimate is that the 4, or 6, Vault Hunters are also in shock by what just happened. I looked at how long this cutscene plays out. It takes 8 seconds for Jack to kill Roland and subdue Lilith, and only 12 seconds after for him to say what he wanted to say before trying to kill you with Lilith. That's not a horribly long amount of time to get over the fact that Roland was just killed right before your eyes, and that Lilith has been kidnapped, so to speak. And it's just short enough that it would be the amount of time you'd be flabbergasted to even react properly as to what happened. Contrast to Borderlands 3, where the majority of the cutscenes where the Vault Hunters are unexpectedly absent play out for minutes at a time without anything major happening, or with generous moments where they could have intervened in certain fights had they not been treated with the Shadow Realm mentality. But if you think that isn't enough of a good reason, let's also say that with Jack having captured Lilith, the Vault Hunters don't want to do anything drastic that would also cost Lilith her life, even if that also means that Jack would also lose his single trump card. But that circumstance comes entirely down to the next issue with this cutscene. So as I had alluded to prior, Angel is selectively dumb about the info she does try to provide to the Vault Hunters in the limited time she has to tell you, and was deliberately cryptic about why she didn't want Lilith to enter her chambers, which is now biting her in the ass, as this was the reason, that if Angel were to die, Jack had this contingency where he would capture Lilith and use her as his suitable replacement. If she simply said, "I'm a siren," to the Crimson Raiders, they would have picked the pieces that Jack needs a siren to charge the key, similarly to how Commandant Steele was able to manipulate the Vault of the Destroyers opening, and they wouldn't have risked the trap. More importantly, if they had known this, Lilith would have yeeted herself out of that control core as soon as she helped Roland destroy the iridium injectors, so that Jack wouldn't have had that chance, assuming that he wouldn't have used Maya as a contingency either, given she's not coped up on iridium like Lilith is. She only forgoes this info both to make the secret of who she is a big twist, as well as to facilitate what happens in this cutscene entirely, despite the fact that entirely betrays her motivation to stop Jack from opening the warrior. And speaking of that motivation, if Jack had this collar that allowed him to subliminally control any siren to his bidding, why didn't he use that on Angel when she started to turn heel on him sooner? I get that he loves her as a daughter first and wouldn't have used it so early, but when she's not so privately spoon-feeding the means to get the key and kill her, it would have definitely behooved of him to use that to essentially put a stop to that. In fact, if he had done so earlier, that would have helped to make a lot of concessions for why she isn't able to forego certain details about who she is actually makes sense, instead of him only using it to get the drop on Lilith. And if Jack had this collar specifically only as a backup strategy, why was he so doggone earlier to make sure Lilith was dead? If he was aware of the fact that sirens get amped up on iridium, he would have almost deliberately made sure that Lilith was either captured alive or made her feed on her impulses just long enough to benefit him. I guess you could reason that Jack wasn't counting on the idea that Angel wouldn't have turned on him and her giving you the means to kill his only shot at the warrior, but given Jack had supposedly orchestrated the events of Borderlands 1 single-handedly, this seems out of character for a dude who always has another trick up his sleeve. As for the lines of dialogue themselves, they are pretty decent, and Jack doesn't split hairs or monologue too much. There's a very noticeable silent avarice in his voice as he personally addresses you, cursing you for ridding him of the only thing he couldn't afford to lose above all else, which also neatly translates into a change of motivations for him, as he doesn't merely want to cleanse Pandora of banditkind so much as now wanting to go complete scorched earth on it, as his primary motivation to do so seems to stem from Angel, which has now all been tossed away. As to how the fuck Mordecai is aware of what even happened on the control core, the only reason I can think of is how Lilith is now able to project herself into your subconscious similarly to how Angel was able to, and probably told him what happened in his own mind. If only the writers of Borderlands 3 have remembered that Lilith was only able to do this because of that device, and not that any given siren could do that, but oh well, you already know that game's plot is garbage. Now on to the matter of hand. Where is Evolve the Warrior, and how do we get there without having to kill Lilith too? With the death of Roland at the hands of Jack and Lilith being apprehended, time is of the essence to look for where the Vault of the Warrior may rest. Mordecai suggests the Hyperion Info Stockade, which is nestled out past the Iridium Blight into some familiar territory if you didn't skip playing Borderlands 1. Although, before we delve into that, let's deviate into another side quest regarding Roland's untimely demise. You immediately get access to the side quest, Bearer of Bad News, to which you can talk to the residents of Sanctuary to let them know of his passing. The reactions will differ between characters, but more or less are sorrowful at his demise, considering how he helped them during the events of Borderlands 1, and some of the DLC too, as well as the events between it and Borderlands 2. You know, I imagine you're waiting for me to stop showcasing demonstrably how Borderlands 2 does so much better at characters, themes, and send-offs compared to Borderlands 3. Well, keep on waiting, motherfuckers, because Borderlands 2 does a much better job at allowing the peeps at Sanctuary to give a requiem to Roland than whatever sad attempt at a joke Borderlands 3 does for Maya, as well as make Ava an absolute cunt in the process of doing so. What's even more baffling about this, which I would have loved to have put in the Borderlands 3 vid if the release of that vid didn't come before the director's cut, is that there was plans to give Maya a proper funeral for her death that they cut out, presumably because of crunch time. Yes, they felt the need to keep that bait and switch fake ending for the game, but not a proper send-off for a major character in the series. Let that swell on your tongue. But before you try to erase the memory of that horrific realization home, we need to get back to the plot of Borderlands 2. The path to the info stockade is blocked by Hyperion security, so it's up to Brick to hatch a plan, which is just to BTFO the way through. To do so, you have to make a detour to Sawtooth Cauldron and collect some explosives from the bandits nestled there. As I remarked when addressing the Bloodshots, the Sawtooth clans don't have nearly as much characterization as they did, merely just a roadblock to the plot ahead, and other than the side mission Capture the Flags, they don't get much more involved beyond that. Supposedly, they had been paid by Jack to go fetch some Vault Hunters to him, once again making me wonder how our respective heroes never got wise to the notion that Jack wasn't going to share the wealth of the Vault with them, but it's a moot point at this venture. You make it to the base of the elevator where a bandit named Mortar refuses to bring down, so you have to antagonize him by destroying his personal buzzard in a different spot not at the top of the elevator. A bit curious that a bandit who is living at a very high place wouldn't have his personal gyrocopter at that place, but again, a slight contrivance will allow to pad the game along. Beyond that, it also allows Jack to get a few more lines in, as he's all but ditched the pretense of being cool-headed about any of this, as well as propping himself as a good guy. In fact, this whole cleansing of Pandora to Jack is now secondary to making certain you and your buddies are all wiped from memory. He makes it especially apparent as he purges his initial $1 million bounty on you, to make a point that he'll personally kill anyone who kills you before he gets the pleasure to do so himself. That's the level that he is on now. Angel was the last remaining piece of sanity that he had left, and now he will never shed any regret about what he does after, as to him it's retribution for what has been done to him. Speaking of retribution, seeing as I had brought it up in Borderlands 3, I figured I'd do it here for posterity. There is a side mission you can find in Iridium Blight offered by Handsome Jack himself, where he requests you kill yourself off a precarious place as catharsis for what you did to him. You can either accept the inconvenience, or contact the Hyperion Suicide Hotline Prevention Line instead. As I brought up in Borderlands 3, if I, being the antagonist of the series, had made enemies with people who death to them is a roadblock more than an absolute, I'd be absolutely shitting myself as to how to kill them. Also curious is that said Vault Hunters are reincarnated with Hyperion tech that just so happens to be out of Handsome Jack's grasp and awareness of using for himself or for Angel. Funny that. At least Borderlands 3 didn't have that unique dissonance of the main protagonist using immortality tech of the very enemies who are wrought to get rid of them in the first place. But again, in defense of this side mission, this is purely one that relies on a mechanic that is not canonical in the series, and the setup itself being non-canon, as the protagonist would never accept an offer from Handsome Jack suggesting killing themselves, nor Handsome Jack would assume they would take that offer. Which comes into yet another side quest I quickly want to mull over before we get back to the plot. There is yet another mission that you can accept from Handsome Jack in which he wants you to go check up on his grandma, assuring you that it isn't a trap. While again the Vault Hunters would loathe to do anything for Handsome Jack, and he not wanting anything to do with them, you can assume that the Vault Hunters had put their differences aside considering Grandma as a bystander in this confrontation, and that Handsome Jack is sincere given he doesn't want another loved one gone. You head on over and notice that bandits have already surrounded the place, getting Handsome Jack worried. You flush out the bandits and enter the home, when you find out that Grandma has been dead for quite some time at the behest of Handsome Jack, who was only worried that the bandits he hired wouldn't be able to do the job before you're rid of them. Why I bring up this particular side mission of note is that it further illustrates deep-seated issues with Jack long before his inevitable snap, that his grandma must have mistreated him, and that as revenge he had her killed and the surrounding place plagued with iridium. Such is the distinction of the name, which will also neatly translate into the manner he keeps another familiar place maintained, but tainted, so to speak, in regards to how the Vault Hunters in Borderlands 1 treated him. It very clearly paints a man who takes grudges to a very personal level, such that you have to assume that his claim to cleanse Pandora in of itself is one giant grudge match. But neat character assessments like that will have to wait for the end, which we are getting close at hand to. Now, back to Sawtooth Cauldron. After destroying Mortar's buzzard, and killing Mortar, You make your way up to the elevator, to which you have to destroy more enemy buzzards circling the hangar so that Bricks' slabs can collect the explosives. You do so and plant markers on the payloads for the buzzards to collect. Afterwards, you can either go back down the elevator and head your way back to the info stockade like a pleb, or jump off the hangar entirely, which comes with one of Brick's most notable lines in Borderlands 2. Heading back through the Iridium Blight, you see that the explosives worked. The path to the stockade is now left wide open, and Brick brings some closing words of enthusiasm before he does some busy work himself to grab some means for their final assault on Jack. That will come important later, but for now, let's deal with the matter at hand. The info stockade away! Mordecai directs you to a great beaming wave of light off in the distance as being the info stockade, to which he'll have you get there through a iridium pipeline. Said pipeline needs to be cracked open with enough pressure, as the ladder to climb on top conveniently has fallen apart as a result. During this, Brick echoes back to inform you he stole a Hyperion drop barge that he and Mordecai can use for their final assault on the vault. Again, this will be important to bring up later, but I'll have to put it aside for now, but for your sake, just know that the circumstances of them appearing don't really make a lot of sense. Handsome Jack also makes a small quip of him doing a bad impression of Roland, which I'm sure nowadays would have gotten the voice actor cancelled for mocking a black man. Current rot of politics aside, you flood the pipeline and ram your vehicle into it, which works, and you head your way to the arid Nexus Badlands. Badlands being the emphasis here, as this area is a one-for-one knockoff of the original arid Badlands in Borderlands 1, albeit with heavy changes. Of note is that Firestone, despite it being overwhelmed with Iridium and the Hyperion infrastructure, has been mostly kept intact, almost deliberately so by Jack as penance for what was done to him in the pre-sequel. But in this context, we just assume that he was just being a massive dick and wanted to stick it to the Vault Hunters who had failed to defend Firestone against him, along with New Haven. Normally when video games typically make callbacks to the original in the sequential series this blatant, it usually comes off as cheap nostalgia of the prior franchise. With this, I think it delicately balances being just bait for would-be players of Borderlands 1 and doing just enough of the area around it to be distinct from the original, since this is the only area from Borderlands 1 we can return to, and it isn't even the whole extent of the original arid Badlands copy-pasted in. Of course, that reminiscence also comes with it the sting of what has transpired, as Handsome Jack again rationalizes his decision to cage Angel because of what she did to her mother. Whether intentional or otherwise, Lilith doesn't believe it, assuming he took complete advantage of her with the excuse of those she hurt being the impetus for it. But for my money, especially with the context come between it and Borderlands 3, that Jack was pure in his intentions, but he has become too far gone to realize the pain he's caused to those he loves. Of course, he's very much aware of the pain he causes to those he hates, as he exudes pleasure from hurting Lilith, knowing she can instantly heal from the iridium he's pumping into her after scolding his abuse of his daughter. Going back on that iridium pipeline we casually destroyed earlier, it's kind of odd that didn't in any way slow Jack's progress to charge the vault key, and that even with Jack on the up and up, hadn't expressed continued annoyance at you stopping his plans at this point. But I'll more or less concede that what Jack is currently doing is an act of desperation, such that he's willing to let annoyances slide so long as he still ultimately has the means to awaken the warrior. You climb to the top of the stockade and download the information regarding the whereabouts, where it appears to be nestled in Heroes Pass judging from the iridium extracted to it. Why the location around Iridium Blight wasn't already a clear inference of that is beyond me, but again, our heroes are on borrowed time and need a surefire destination rather than a guess. So with the location of the vault triangulated, and with Brick's drop barge ready to lay waste, it's time for the final assault and final chapter of this story. With everything set in place to lay the final siege down on the Vault of the Warrior, it's time to head on off with Mordecai, Brick, and Claptrap. But not before you talk with the locals first, who are willing to give you anything they need to take down Jack. Because unlike Borderlands 3, yes, get used to hearing that a lot, which had tried to imitate that same effect only to trample on it with its fake ending, Borderlands 2 gives in-depth motivations for each of the residents of Sanctuary to want you to kill Jack. Tannis for having been beaten to a pulp and Scar for the death of her chair. Yeah, it doesn't really make sense even with context. Ned for having been kicked out of his hometown, and Marcus for thinning him on his weapon-stealing business, to name a few. Hell, even the people that aren't present at Sanctuary, like Tiny Tina and Ellie, at least share a few words of encouragement your way. Again, unlike in Borderlands 3, where at most you get a line from Reese and Wainwright and no one else, which I remind you still makes no sense given where they are relative to what's happening. You really get the impression that you'll likely not come out of this alive, and that you and the remaining Vault Hunters from Borderlands 1 are willing to stop at nothing to thwart Jack's ultimate plan. Of course, the items of which the various residents will give you will vary, and most, if not all of them, are worthless if you've decked out in the best gear imaginable, but when it comes to story, it's the thought that counts, and that counts a lot more than treating our antagonists as no more than a mild nuisance like the Calypsos are in Borderlands 3. Of course, barring entry into Heroes Pass is locked, which means Claptrap, the proverbial king of opening things, has to come assist you in doing so. While I would love to be spared the burden of ever having to play three-legged race with one of the most annoying characters ever, I can forgive that for what it provides for Claptrap's character arc. Yes, Claptrap gets a fucking character arc in this story, because he, like the rest of the residents, has a reason to hate Jack and get his dues, particularly with his product line being wiped and he being the sole remaining Claptrap. Of course, said character arc is hampered by needless comedy and contrived setbacks to opening the large doors, even if some of the lines said are humorous.
Reinforcements depleted.
Don't worry, baby! Happens to a lot of girls!
But having Claptrap gain even the smallest satisfaction over Jack by opening the way and being disappointed that the way forward is a staircase he can't climb is at least enough to feel some empathy towards Claptrap. Maybe I'll go into detail why I really don't like Claptrap as a character when and if I go over Borderlands 1's story, as well as parts of the pre-sequel too, since their product line hadn't been shelved as of yet, but for now, I can at least appreciate that, for as annoying as Claptrap is, that even he gets some kind of closure for his character. Once entering Heroes Pass, Handsome Jack is getting psychotically elated that the key is nearly charged, that he almost seems to imply he's going to destroy Pandora with the warrior rather than merely save it from bandit kind, which isn't beneath him with his mindset. You're attacked by the aforementioned drop barge, which gets shot out by the one that Brick stole earlier, to which we have more problems. So you remember that issue regarding the death wall and you not being able to ride one of the buzzards to fly over it? Yeah, this is the same exact problem. Mordecai literally states that you need to open the entrance to get access to Heroes Pass, but Mordecai and Brick on the drop barge are just able to waltz on by without it, making you wonder again why you didn't just ride that instead of doing the more convoluted method. Now, of course, having you do that would undo any character arc for Claptrap, but it being here only necessitates another thing that will happen soon after, which has its own issues in of itself. But by God, was there really no way to have Mordecai and Brick convincingly fight alongside with you? They already coded it in pretty well when you were fighting bandits with Brick and Lilith earlier, so why not here? But seeing as the story is nearing its close, certain contrivances like this are just dust in the wind. At least Mordecai and Brick are fighting alongside with you for as long as they can, up until they blow out yet more barriers, to which the drop barge gets swarmed, and Brick tries to help out Mordecai before getting hit with the lunar bombardments that the writers just remembered existed for this moment, plunging presumably to their death. I say presumably with huge quotation marks, because while it would be really tragic and put much more gravity to the situation knowing that Mordecai and Brick died trying to help you kill Jack, it's unfortunately one of Borderlands 2's only bait and switches it pulls off. Once closing in on the vault, we get one of Handsome Jack's last monologues to you, again condemning you for your bandit ways in a fit of projection over how hateful and greedy you are, and that he is ultimately necessary in cleansing Pandora of such filth. Run onto the pedestal, we're greeted with a short cutscene of Lilith in a trance as she's forced to charge the vault key, as Handsome Jack proceeds to fight you before it is fully done. It goes that you would expect a 4-on-1 fight with Handsome Jack's only true ace up his sleeve being able to project decoys of himself and spawn surveyor bots to heal or conceal him. Bruised and bleeding out, he makes one last hurrah and activates the vault key, which projects some kind of impenetrable shield for both Lilith and Jack as you bear witness to the warrior's presence. I guess it's kind of convenient that activating said key gave Jack just a bit more time to live before being finished off by you, but I guess you could argue that it's there for the benefit of one who had activated the warrior, so they could command it without getting killed instantly like a certain Commandant Steel-faced. Unfortunately for you, you don't get that same treatment and have to defeat the warrior in order to stop it. Considering the insurmountable odds that the Vault Hunters in Borderlands 1 were able to fend off, I think you know exactly how this goes. But a little comment on the fight itself. Remember how I said how it was annoying how Lilith would give you tips about a boss like as if the developers weren't confident in your own ability to fend it off? Well, that's not unique to Borderlands 3, as Lilith loves to spam over and over again about how the lava is rising and to find higher ground, regardless of where you're positioned. In fact, it literally makes no sense why you would ever even leave from the center of the battlefield, as it's the highest place on the map and the best vantage point to fight said warrior itself. Speaking of vantage point, for a vault monster that was initially poised to fight the destroyer at its full strength, it's oddly convenient that it has such a glaring weak spot on its chest for you to lay waste to. Anyhow, you bring the beast down, much to Handsome Jack's utter dismay and panic, and Lilith has you make certain its death by firing the very moonshots Jack has been using against you, which apparently their coordinates were already set to fire on where the warrior was? Maybe Jack had these coordinates set just in case the warrior wasn't keen on obeying orders? Needless to say, the job is done. You have saved Pandora from certain doom, and Jack is at his last gasp, realizing that he wasn't the hero of this story. Of course, being at death's door doesn't stop Jack cursing you for how you stopped him being so close to his goal, especially at the hands of one who killed his daughter in the process. And while the pre-sequel entails would be fit to include him to give more depth to his already stellar character work, Handsome Jack's arc in this story is complete, with all the bells and whistles in tow. His desire for the hero complex brought him into a path of wanton destruction and desperation to fix the faults that he sees with Pandora, all the while condemning all those who wronged him along the way as nothing more than perpetrators of that fault. He started this story cool and collected, certain that like all hero stories, he was going to come out on top. But with his fate at the hands of either you or Lilith, his terrifying monster gone, and the infamy he sowed coming to reap its payment, he's broken, distraught, and scared of the realization that he wasn't the hero he thought he was. While Borderlands 3 has unfortunately canonized via Ava that Lilith was the one to put Jack in the dirt, you can choose whether she or you do the finishing blow. To which you get another bit of intrigue about Jack as the mask he wore falls off, revealing a damaged and scarred man with the Vault logo seared across his face. I think it's very apt that Jack wears this mask, being a very strong analogy for the person he pretends to be, trying to cloak the very evil yet human part inside of him. The mask gives him a clean, clear, and dare say, handsome aesthetic to him, warm and welcoming even if you ignore his chortles and arrogance, reflective of his want to cleanse Pandora for the greater good. But it's a facade. Underneath it is not handsome, but almost deranged in his figure, a blind eye complementing the various burn scars across him, revealing the truth of his intentions to cleanse Pandora not out of good, but out of revenge. Revenge for the things done to him, to his daughter, and like his blind eye, he turns a blind eye to the horrors that he caused in the attempt to justify the acts as though they are the only way to make good out of Pandora, even turning a blind eye to the people he claims to care for in the process. I think even the Vault symbol scar on his face also paints a neat picture of his obsession with both Iridium and of the Vaults themselves, foregoing any other desire beyond it. How he got those scars is better stated in the pre-sequel, and honestly, do a lot of damage to the mystery of them when further explained, but nevertheless still fundamentally characterizes the fake veneer that he tries to paint himself as, while the underbelly is wretched and broken. Handsome Jack is one of the most compelling antagonists from last decade, and there are very few that really capture the intensity of his presence, as well as the way he goes about his methods of accomplishing said goal. While he does certainly have some faults to him that aren't consistent with his character, and he allows some things to happen from the benefit of the story, he stands at the peak of what you can do with a video game antagonist, while Tyrene sits forgotten at the bottom with just a cunt hair above Commandant Steele. Any issues with the consistency of his character are nowhere close to the issues regarding Tyrene, and even so, Tyrene's character is about as one-dimensional as it comes, ignoring all the stupid decisions she ultimately makes in the process. But we need to hold our analysis of the story for later. There's still one more cutscene to get on through. So Lilith insists on wanting to destroy the Vault Key, as it's brought nothing but problems for her and the rest of Pandora. With behind her, we see that Mordecai and Brick made it out alive without so much as a bit of a limp. Hooray! Glad that we decided to undo any tension regarding their would-be death, just so that Lilith can actually act like a bitch and complain they didn't show up earlier. A bit of a contrived way to shoehorn in a possible death for these characters too, seeing as Jack never once used the moonshots on you as you were getting close to the vault, especially out of character for Lilith to act this way towards them when all she knows they could have fucking died getting to her. Jeez, that's reminding me of someone, but I just can't put my finger on it. Oh well, I'm sure this sudden cunt-like behavior isn't an omen for any future characters the writers would want to add in Borderlands 3, I'm sure. Anyhow, Lilith proceeds to use her phase powers to try to destroy it, but in attempting to do so reveals that the key is not only a key, but a map. A map that sprawls 100 other would-be vaults in various planets throughout the galaxy. Said cliffhanger ending is left for Borderlands 3 to fill, which it does so poorly, and the story of Borderlands 2 is finally at a close. But wait, you retort. What about the Fight for Sanctuary DLC that picks up from where Borderlands 2 left off? And yes, you're right. By all accounts, the DLC is significant in tying up certain loose ends between it and Borderlands 3, as we clearly see that the Crimson Raiders aren't using the floating city of Sanctuary, nor has possession of the Vault Key itself. The short answer for if I'm going to regard that DLC is no, but the long answer is that it's very complicated to cover that piece of the story, as it was DLC that was released 7 years after Borderlands 2 was released worldwide. And the writers of Borderlands 2 are not the same writers of that DLC. I do want to cover that DLC in future, but in order for me to do so, I have to also regard a lot of what happened in Tales from the Borderlands, as it also has characters from it making a return in said DLC. Normally, I never even regard most of the DLC in any of the Borderlands series, as most, save for one, for each respective game, are just extra anecdotes into the exploits of the Vault Hunters. But Fight for Sanctuary is unique in how it was released in lieu of the release of Borderlands 3, and tacked on a game that is almost 10 years old now. I want to keep all criticism of this story tied to vanilla Borderlands 2 specifically, and not burden the length of this story with content that was not intended to complement the story with the same writers in mind. Because while Borderlands 2 does suffer from several contrivances, glaring plot holes, and unnecessary humor throughout, Borderlands 2, as a story, still holds up quite well to this day. The head writer for Borderlands 2, Anthony Birch, did a stellar job of interweaving the motivations of our protagonists and antagonists very well, while keeping many of the retcons introduced in Borderlands 2 not contingent on breaking the already empty story of Borderlands 1. And while I know that's rich for me to give praise to a man who let his ideology plague future writing ventures, you still got to give a broken clock credit for at least being right twice a day. Of course, I can't give praise for forcing a lot of the humor in this game, as that advice was taken up to 11 in Borderlands 3, or the fact that certain revelations about characters come at the cost of nonsense happening, like with Angel not confiding in you about being a siren or the Firehawk being a threat to you. But while this apple does have some run on the outside and it's been bitten into and has fallen down a few stairs, at its core it's still ripe and rich with the kind of character building that can forgive most of the issues with the narrative it's trying to tell. With an antagonist that is intimidating not by his power level, but by his charisma and ambition, who never once is cheapened by the attempt of chasing a trend for relevancy, or treated with the kind of arrogance that is used to excuse smart characters being dumb, makes it all the more sweeter to finally give that character his just desserts. And with talking about the narrative in mind, let's go over the themes, shall we? The The first major theme that I want to get right out of the way, considering that I alluded to it constantly throughout, is the theme of betrayal. From the very beginning of the story, this theme is already well established, with Handsome Jack betraying the trust of vault hunters sharing the spoils of the vault by trying to kill them. Furthermore, you also get betrayed by the guardian angel that you presumed had your best intentions in mind, while also betraying the same vault hunters who were led to open the vault of the destroyer. But betrayal doesn't just come from across enemy territory. Handsome Jack himself betrays people from his own inner circle, like with Wilhelm, who he sacrifices in an attempt to kill all the vault hunters in tow, or of his girlfriend, whom he sidelined her to be a sheriff for a town that has no broader scope to his ultimate plans. And most importantly, his own daughter, who he betrayed the very familial trust that you would expect out of a father by abusing her for his own interests, despite his claims to be doing all this for her. I guess you can also make a comical stretch by implying that Roland betrayed Brick by treating him like a bandit first before a friend. But as I said about this interaction, it doesn't get elucidated any farther than that, and the residents of Sanctuary don't do any kind of betrayal even when Jack puts that bounty on your head. When you become betrayed, you often want to enact revenge, and revenge as a theme is also carried vigorously throughout. It's the major driving motivation for all of the residents of Sanctuary to want to kill Jack, as well as yours. And further prods into Jack's mentality also shows that a lot of what he's set out to do is an act of revenge himself, either on behalf of things done to him or on behalf of his daughter, much to her detriment. This theme is also exemplified in the errant moments where characters want their just dues, like with Mordecai's pet Bloodwing getting killed, or Brick going down the path of a bandit after the loss of his pet too, or simply by the fact that you, as a player character, want to get back at Jack for what he did to you at the beginning of the very game itself. A lot of these intense moments of recompense cause characters to act irrationally, however, like with Roland trying to ensure the safety of Sanctuary despite Lilith and Mordecai's desires to go with him to assault the bunker, or of Lilith having barreled herself right into Jack's clutches as soon as Roland got. The third, but least explored theme, surprisingly enough, is the desire to be the hero. While equivocally, this sentiment is shared by Handsome Jack throughout, it isn't thusly explored through the perspective of the player characters, or of the secondary protagonists, which is odd considering the side quests that allude to the gray area involving the morality of our would-be heroes, as well as a pre-sequel adding context that would somewhat vindicate why Jack acted out as he did towards them once he took the reins of power. The hero complex is only used to give credence to why Jack is set about his course to cleanse Pandora, and not to subvert the black and white notion of heroism we tend to expect out of heroes' stories. You could say that they at least followed through on this theme, as Jack comes cracking down to his bare core once the realization sets in, but it's only explored through him, and only retroactively obtained through the pre-sequel's additional context. With all that in mind, however, Borderlands 2 stands at the pinnacle of improving upon the proof of concept that was Borderlands 1. A more complex and engaging story plot-wise, with an antagonist that demands your attention and earns it viciously, and character arcs that are filled whole rather than left for future installments to patch up. I'm looking at you, Borderlands 3 and Tales. I know you were likely expecting me to shit all over Borderlands 2 at the beginning, when I said this game isn't as nearly flawless as you would expect, and yes, while Borderlands 2 has a glaring plot hole that allows the third act to play out as it does, it's still held up by the rich character work of the antagonist that usually forgives most contrivances regarding the narrative. Although, because Borderlands 3 has been canonized into the ongoing lore for the Borderlands series, has retroactively made everything Jack was doing during those events completely justified as, had he been able to go about accomplishing his goal, would have likely squashed any and all bandits that Tyrene would have sapped to go about her means of opening the Great Vault. Which I don't think was the intention the writers of Borderlands 2 were going for, even if you could see where Jack was coming from pragmatically. Which is perhaps the second worst thing Borderlands 3 accomplishes beyond being completely disassociated from itself as a game split from telling a story, which Borderlands 2 does suffer from on occasion, but not to the extent that it completely undoes the stakes of its setting, like the fast travel network existing for the sake of a plot element or a major character getting killed by means they wouldn't have otherwise. All things considered, Borderlands 2 tells a straightforward story of a man set out for revenge, believing his methods to be tenable, while ensuring his demise by the very hellish path he carved for himself. I want to give a final nod to the voice actor, Damian Clark, who is critical in giving Handsome Jack his iconic demeanor, and had any voice actor taken the role, would have likely not carried the troubled parts of Borderlands 2 on his shoulders, like he did. And that's that, folks. This video took me roughly 7 months to make, which was considerably less time than it took me to make the BL3 vid, both in that it is shorter and that I had less complications going into making it. While it would have taken me even shorter had I not given myself a side project involving reprising old photos and poems I've done throughout the last 10 years, you would have likely seen this at least a few months sooner. But I like to take my time on this, as I need to ensure that I have not rushed explaining and subsequently picking apart the story from every angle so that it serves as a cautionary reminder of what not to do when writing a video game story. And if you do need a reminder, my Borderlands 3 as a story vid has a good 4 hours of describing just that. Speaking of that, and future projects, as I've now officially made myself the Borderlands series analyzer, with emphasis on the anal, I'm still very much interested in covering Borderlands 3's gameplay, as it's the best the series has provided, but I want to provide my own gameplay as a backdrop instead of ripping it from the usual sources, as I need the specific examples that demonstrates its faults or triumphs, which means getting a PC copy of it, which would be the first ever in the Borderlands series that I've ever played on PC. Furthermore, the pre-sequel also has my sights, as it sits roughly between BL2 and BL3 in terms of quality and shittiness, as there are quite a few problems, both narrative and ideological, that ruin certain aspects of Borderlands 2. This time, however, I'm not going to rest those prospects on the chance that these videos get views, and will be made when I'm ready to start addressing said story. But if you do feel compelled to support me some other way, I'm also in the interest of making a Patreon where you can donate money to show your support without locking off future content I'm making, as I want to approach Patreon in a similar veneer to how Harmful Opinions handles his Patreon account. Both in that I would be terrible at meeting certain subscription goals, and that I hate arbitrarily locking off content, knowing that I would love to share it all with you but be obligated to in an attempt to fleece you out of your money. I want you to give me your money willingly, without any catch to it, as that would ensure to me that you do support me for what I'm actually making now and in future, and not what is behind a paywall. Keeping my principles intact, of course, all links to the various video sources will be credited in order of appearance in the pinned comment of this video, as any visual context for the things I'm explaining would be lost without them, even knowing this video won't be monetized in my current standing. I'm glad that you've sat here with me for this long, and can't wait to show you what else I've got planned. Thank you for watching, and this is Something Guy 912, signing out.